When Vikings fell ill, they followed a treatment that modern science would later partially confirm. Yet it involved a fish-like stench so strong that most people today couldn't tolerate it. So what exactly were they doing? Before we start, likes and subscribes help me keep making these. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them, thinking, wait, people in Minnesota listen to history stories to sleep. Okay, tonight we are talking about what Vikings ate when they got sick, and why it smelled like fish. But before we go anywhere, get cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled. Perfect. Trust me on this one. You're standing in a longhouse somewhere along the fjords of Norway, around the year 950. The air inside is thick with smoke from the central hearth, and the smell, well, we'll get to that. Outside, the wind is doing that thing where it sounds like it's trying to have a conversation with the wooden walls. You can hear it whistling through gaps in the timber, persistent and cold. Inside, though, there's warmth. Not the kind you'd call comfortable exactly, but the kind that keeps you alive when winter stretches on for months and the sun barely bothers to show up. Someone is sick. You can tell because they're lying on a bench near the fire, wrapped in furs that smell like wool and wood smoke and something vaguely animal. Their face is pale, their breathing shallow. This is not unusual. People get sick here all the time. What is unusual is what happens next. Because the Vikings, for all their reputation as raiders and warriors and people who named their swords, had a very specific approach to illness, and it involved fish. A lot of fish. But I haven't told you the most important part yet. The Vikings were a warlike and nomadic people. In times of war, the ocean was their best friend. Women and children were left behind. You watch as an older woman, grey hair braided tight against her skull, hands rough and capable, moves toward the sick person with a wooden bowl. The bowl is steaming. The smell that rises from it is so pungent, it almost makes you take a step back. It's briny, sharp, with an undertone of something fermented. Your eyes water slightly. The woman doesn't flinch. She's done this before. She kneels beside the bench and speaks in Old Norse, her voice low and steady. You don't understand all the words, but the tone is clear. This is medicine. This is care. This is what you do when someone you know might not make it through the week. The sick person turns their head slightly, grimacing. But they don't refuse, because refusing this particular remedy would be foolish. And whatever else the Vikings were, they weren't fools about survival. But what exactly is in that bowl? And why does it smell like the ocean decided to wage war on your nostrils? You step closer, careful not to disturb the scene, and peer into the bowl. The contents are murky, grey-brown, with bits of something floating near the surface. Fish, obviously, but not the kind of fish you'd recognise from a modern dinner plate. This is fermented fish, specifically, rackfisk or something close to it, though the exact name doesn't matter as much as what it does. The fish has been buried in salt and left to ferment for weeks, sometimes months. The process breaks down the proteins, makes the flesh soft and pungent, and creates a smell that can clear a room if you're not used to it. But here's the thing, it works. The woman dips a wooden spoon into the bowl and lifts a small portion to the sick person's lips. They take it slowly, grimacing again, but swallowing. The broth is warm. The fish is rich in nutrients, omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, protein, all things the body desperately needs when it's fighting off infection or fever. The fermentation process also creates beneficial bacteria, the kind that help the gut, which in turn helps the immune system. The Vikings didn't know about bacteria or immune systems, of course. They just knew that people who ate this stuff when they were sick tended to get better more often than people who didn't. You can hear the fire crackling, a soft hiss and pop as a log shifts and settles. The sick person's breathing seems a little steadier now. Maybe it's the warmth of the broth. Maybe it's the nutrients. Maybe it's just the comfort of being cared for, which is its own kind of medicine. But we're not done yet. Because fermented fish was only one part of the Viking approach to illness. And honestly, it wasn't even the strangest part. The woman stands and moves toward the back of the longhouse, where shelves line the walls. These shelves are packed with pouches, dried herbs hanging from hooks, small clay jars sealed with wax. She selects a pouch, opens it, and the smell that escapes is sharper, greener, like crushed leaves and earth, and something faintly bitter. Yarrow. You recognize it because you've seen it growing wild in the fields, small white flowers clustered at the top of tall stems. The Vikings called it something else, but the plant is the same. It's been used for centuries to stop bleeding, reduce fever, and ease inflammation. The woman takes a pinch of the dried leaves and adds them to another bowl, this one filled with hot water from a pot hanging over the fire. The steam rises, carrying the scent of yarrow into the smoky air. She lets it steep for a moment, then carries it back to the sick person. They drink this one more willingly. It's bitter, yes, but not as overwhelming as the fish broth. And within minutes you can see a faint sheen of sweat forming on their forehead. The fever is breaking, just a little. But I still haven't told you the weirdest part, or the part that probably saved more Viking lives than any raid ever did. Because the Vikings didn't just rely on food and herbs, they believed, deeply, genuinely believed, that some illnesses came from forces you couldn't see. Spirits, curses, the ill will of someone who didn't like you. And so they treated those invisible causes with invisible remedies. You watch as the woman reaches for a small wooden amulet hanging on the wall. It's carved with runes, symbols that twist and loop in ways that make your eyes want to follow them. She places the amulet on the sick person's chest, murmuring words you can't quite hear. The sick person's eyes close, their breathing slows, deepens. Is it magic? Is it belief? Is it just the body's natural ability to heal itself when given rest and care? The answer, frustratingly, is probably all three, and none of them. But that's the part that makes this interesting. Because the Vikings understood something modern medicine sometimes forgets. Healing isn't just physical, it's psychological, it's social. It's the feeling that someone is doing something, that you're not alone, that your community hasn't given up on you. And that, more than the fish or the herbs or the runes, might be the most important part of all. But what did they do when none of this worked? When the fever didn't break and the person didn't recover? We'll get there, just not yet. You're still in the longhouse, and the hours are passing in that slow, indistinct way they do when you're waiting for something to change. The sick person is sleeping now, or at least resting with their eyes closed. The fire has burned down to embers, glowing soft and red in the dimness. Someone adds another log, and the flames leap up again, throwing shadows across the wooden walls. Outside, you can hear the wind picking up, that low howl that means the weather is turning. Inside, though, the air is warm and close, heavy with the smell of smoke and fish and herbs and human bodies living in close quarters. The woman who brought the remedies is sitting near the hearth now, working on something with her hands. You move closer and see that she's grinding dried leaves in a stone mortar, crushing them into a fine powder. The motion is rhythmic, almost meditative. She doesn't look up as you approach, but she speaks anyway, her voice quiet and matter-of-fact. She's talking about the remedies, about how her mother taught her and her mother before that, and so on back through generations of women who learned which plants stopped bleeding and which ones made you vomit if you ate something poisonous. This knowledge wasn't written down. It lived in hands and memory and careful observation. But I haven't told you what they did for wounds yet, and trust me, wounds were common. Because the Vikings, despite what the sagas might have you believe, didn't spend all their time raiding and fighting. Most of them were farmers. They worked the land, raised animals, fished, built ships, repaired roofs, chopped wood, and all of that meant injuries, cuts from axes, burns from fires, broken bones from falls, infections from splinters that went too deep. You watch as a young man enters the longhouse, holding his hand wrapped in a cloth. Blood is seeping through the fabric, dark and wet. He's trying to look unbothered, but you can see the tightness around his eyes. The woman sets down her mortar and gestures for him to sit. He does, unwrapping the cloth carefully. The cut is deep, running across his palm from the base of his thumb to his wrist. It's still bleeding, though not as heavily as it probably was when it first happened. The woman examines it without touching, then nods to herself and stands. She moves to the shelves again, selecting items with practiced efficiency. First, she brings back a bowl of clean water. Well, as clean as water gets when it's been sitting in a wooden bucket all day. She rinses the wound gently, and the young man hisses through his teeth but doesn't pull away. Then she reaches for a jar, opens it, and the smell that emerges is sweet and thick and unmistakable. Honey. You watch as she spreads a layer of honey directly onto the wound, coating it thoroughly. The young man's expression shifts from pain to confusion to something like resigned acceptance. She works quickly, then reaches for another pouch, this one containing dried moss, sphagnum moss specifically, which grows in the bogs and wetlands all over Scandinavia. She presses a wad of it against the honey-covered wound, then wraps the whole thing in clean linen. The young man flexes his fingers experimentally, winces, then nods his thanks and leaves. But why honey, and why moss? The answer, again, is that they worked. Honey is antibacterial. It creates a barrier that keeps infections out while also promoting healing. Sphagnum moss is absorbent and also has natural antiseptic properties. The Vikings didn't know the science, but they knew that people whose wounds were treated this way had a better chance of keeping their hands than people whose wounds weren't. And keeping your hand, in a society where almost all work was manual labor, meant the difference between survival and dependency, between being useful and being a burden. You sink down onto one of the benches, feeling the weight of that reality settle over you like a heavy cloak. Because here's the thing about Viking medicine that nobody really talks about. It was brutal in its practicality. There was no sentimentality, no false hope. If a wound was too severe, if an infection had spread too far, if a fever had gone on too long, they knew, and they made decisions accordingly. But before we get to that part, and we will, I promise, there's something else you need to understand about how the Vikings approached sickness. They didn't see it as random. They saw it as connected to everything else. The weather, the seasons, the behavior of animals, the dreams people had, the way the smoke rose from the fire. Illness was part of a larger pattern, and if you could read that pattern correctly, you could sometimes prevent the illness before it started. Or at least, that's what they believed. You're watching the woman work, and you realize she's checking things constantly. The color of someone's tongue when they complain of stomach pain, the smell of their breath when they have a cough, the temperature of their skin, not just whether it's hot or cold, but the quality of that heat, dry or damp, steady or fluctuating. She's reading bodies the way you might read a book, looking for information that tells her what's happening inside where she can't see. This is diagnostic medicine, Viking style, and it's surprisingly sophisticated. She notices you watching and gestures for you to follow her outside. You step through the doorway into the cold, and the shock of it makes you gasp. The air is sharp and clean after the smoky closeness of the longhouse. The sky is that peculiar grey-white that means snow is coming, probably soon. She walks toward a small structure near the edge of the settlement, a storage shed maybe, or a workshop. Inside, there are more shelves, more jars, more bundles of dried plants hanging from the rafters. But there's also something else. Animal parts, a basket of fish heads, dried seabird eggs, something that might be a seal flipper, antlers, bones. She picks up one of the fish heads and holds it up to the light coming through the doorway. She's checking for something, though you're not sure what. Then she sets it down and selects another, nodding in satisfaction. Fish heads, you learn, were used to make a particularly strong broth for people who were recovering from illness. The eyes, the cheeks, the collar, all of it went into the pot. The result was rich and fatty and absolutely packed with nutrients. It tasted, by all accounts, exactly like you'd expect a pot of boiled fish heads to taste. But people who ate it recovered faster. But I still haven't told you about the garlic, and the garlic is where things get interesting. Because the Vikings, despite being so far north, did have access to garlic. It grew in some areas, and it was also traded from further south. And they used it for a very specific diagnostic purpose. If someone had a deep wound, particularly a stomach wound from a weapon, they would give the person garlic to eat. Then they would wait and smell the wound. If the wound started to smell like garlic, it meant the intestines had been punctured. And if the intestines had been punctured, the person was going to die. There was no way to fix that kind of injury with the tools and knowledge they had. It was a test, a brutal, practical test that told them whether to keep treating someone or whether to start preparing for their death. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the cold air. The woman sees your expression and shrugs slightly. It's not callous exactly, it's just realistic. Resources were limited, time was limited. There was no point in wasting either on someone who couldn't be saved when there were others who could be. She leads you back inside, and you're grateful for the warmth, even if it comes with the smell of fish and smoke and too many people in one space. Back by the fire, the sick person is awake now, sitting up slowly. Someone has brought them more broth. This one looks different, clearer, with pieces of what might be onion floating in it. They eat slowly, carefully, and you can see colour starting to return to their face. The woman sits down beside them and places a hand on their forehead, checking for fever. She seems satisfied with what she finds. She says something in Old Norse, and the sick person nods, managing a weak smile. Across the longhouse, children are playing some kind of game with small carved pieces, their laughter high and bright in the smoky air. An older man is repairing a fishing net, his fingers working the knots with practiced ease. A woman is spinning wool, the spindle twirling hypnotically as the thread grows longer. Life is continuing, that's the point. Even with sickness, even with injury, even with death, life continues. But what happened when the remedies didn't work, when the fever didn't break, and the wound didn't heal, and the person slipped further and further away? That's when things got complicated, because the Vikings had beliefs about death that were as practical as their beliefs about healing, and those beliefs shaped how they cared for the dying in ways that might surprise you. You settle in to watch, to wait, to see what happens next, because in a Viking longhouse in the year 950, during the long dark months of winter, that's really all any of you can do. Wait, watch, hope, and prepare for whatever comes, whether that's healing or something else entirely. But before we get to that, there's something else you should know about their remedies, something that involved animals in ways you probably wouldn't expect. You're sitting near the fire now, watching the flames do their restless dance, when you notice someone bringing in a goat. Not a live goat, thankfully, just the bladder, cleaned, dried, flexible like leather but thinner. The woman who's been preparing remedies all evening takes it without comment, as if people bring her animal bladders on a regular basis, which, you're starting to realize, they probably do. She fills the bladder with hot water from the pot over the fire, ties it shut with a leather cord and wraps it in cloth. Then she places it against the sick person's chest. A hot water bottle, essentially. Medieval Viking heating pad. The sick person sighs, and you can see their muscles relax slightly, the tension easing from their shoulders. It's such a simple thing, but simple things you're learning were what kept people alive. The goat bladder will stay warm for an hour, maybe more, long enough for the heat to penetrate deep into the chest, easing the tightness that comes with lung infections, long enough for the sick person to rest more comfortably. And rest, more than almost anything else, was what allowed the body to heal itself. But animal parts weren't just used for heat, they were used for everything. You watch as someone else enters carrying what looks like a sheep's stomach, also cleaned and dried. This one gets filled with a mixture of herbs and hot stones, not boiling hot, just warm enough to release the scent of the herbs without burning them. Chamomile maybe, or meadowsweet, something that smells faintly sweet and calming. The sheep's stomach gets placed near the sick person's head, and the scent begins to fill that corner of the longhouse. You can see the sick person's breathing deepen, slow, become more regular. Aromatherapy, Viking style. Except they didn't call it that, they just called it helping someone sleep. But I haven't told you about the butter yet, and the butter is important. Because the Vikings made a very specific kind of butter that they buried in peat bogs. Bog butter it was called, though that name wouldn't come until much later. They would pack butter into wooden containers, or wrap it in cloth, then bury it in the cold, oxygen-poor environment of the bog. It could stay there for months, even years, and the bog would preserve it, change it, transform it into something that wasn't quite butter anymore, but wasn't quite anything else either. And when someone had a burn, a bad one, the kind that blistered and wept and refused to heal, they would dig up some of that bog butter and spread it on the wound. The woman reaches for a small clay pot, sealed with wax. She breaks the seal, and the smell that emerges is strange, earthy, with that unmistakable tang of fermentation. She scoops out a dollop of something pale and greasy, and spreads it on a piece of cloth. Then she gestures to a child sitting near the fire, a girl maybe 8 or 9 years old, who has a burn on her forearm. The child comes over reluctantly, holding her arm out. The woman applies the bog butter gently, and the child winces but doesn't pull away. Within moments, you can see the tension leave her face. The pain is easing. The bog butter is cool against the burn, and whatever chemical changes happened to it during its time underground have made it soothing, anti-inflammatory, maybe even antibacterial. The child returns to her spot by the fire, cradling her arm carefully, and you notice she's not crying anymore. Small victories. That's what medicine was in this time and place. Small victories accumulated over days and weeks, until someone was well enough to work again, to contribute again, to survive another winter. You lean back against the wall, feeling the rough wood against your shoulders, and try to imagine what it must have been like to live this way. To know that a cut that got infected could kill you, that a fever that lasted too long meant you might never wake up, that childbirth was dangerous, that winter was dangerous, that even something as simple as a bad tooth could lead to an infection that spread to your jaw, your blood, your brain. And yet people survived. Not just survived, they thrived. They built ships that crossed oceans. They established trade networks that stretched from Scandinavia to Constantinople. They created art and poetry and laws and societies that lasted for centuries. How? The answer, you're beginning to understand, is that they were pragmatic, relentlessly, almost brutally pragmatic. They used what worked, discarded what didn't, and didn't waste time on sentimentality when survival was at stake. But that pragmatism had limits, because even the Vikings, for all their practical approach to medicine, recognized that some things couldn't be fixed with fish broth and honey and dried herbs. Some things required intervention from forces beyond the physical world. You're watching the fire burn lower when you notice someone new entering the longhouse. This person is different, older maybe, though it's hard to tell in the flickering light. They move with a kind of deliberate purpose, carrying a leather bag that clinks softly with each step. Everyone in the longhouse notices their arrival. The conversations don't stop exactly, but they quiet, become more subdued. This is a vulva, a seer, a practitioner of Seither, the kind of magic that involved seeing the future, communing with spirits, working with forces that existed outside the normal world. Not everyone believed in this, even in Viking society, but enough people did that vulvas were respected, feared, consulted when things got serious. The vulva approaches the sick person, sets down their bag, and begins removing items. You can't see everything, but you catch glimpses, carved wooden pieces, small bones, what might be a bundle of dried herbs tied with red thread. They speak quietly with the woman who's been treating the sick person all evening, and you can see them both nodding, agreeing on something. Then the vulva begins to chant. It's low at first, almost a murmur, but it gradually grows louder. The words are Old Norse, but not the kind you hear in everyday conversation. This is older, stranger, with rhythms that don't quite match normal speech. The sound fills the longhouse, and you feel it in your chest, in your bones, in the back of your throat. The sick person's eyes are closed. Their breathing has changed again, deeper and slower. The vulva continues chanting, their hands moving in patterns above the sick person's body, not quite touching, but close enough that you can see the air between them seems to shimmer slightly in the firelight. Is this helping, scientifically, medically, in any measurable way? Maybe not, probably not, but here's what it is doing. It's giving the sick person something to focus on besides their pain. It's giving everyone in the longhouse a sense that something is being done, that forces beyond their control are being marshaled in favor of healing. It's creating a communal moment of hope and intention. And maybe, just maybe, that matters more than we give it credit for. But I haven't told you about the dreams yet, and the dreams were crucial. Because the Vikings believed that dreams were portals, windows into other worlds, other times, other states of being. If you were sick and you dreamed of specific things, water, birds, ships, certain colors, those dreams meant something. They were messages from spirits, or gods, or ancestors, telling you whether you would recover, or whether you should prepare for death. The vulva asks the sick person about their dreams. You can hear the conversation, quiet and serious. The sick person describes something involving water, a river maybe, and the vulva nods thoughtfully. They consult the carved wooden pieces, laying them out in a pattern on the floor that seems random to you but clearly means something to them. After several minutes, the vulva speaks. Their voice is calm, reassuring. Whatever the dreams meant, whatever the pieces revealed, the message is positive. The sick person will recover. It will take time, but they will recover. You see the relief wash over the sick person's face, over the faces of their family members sitting nearby. The vulva packs up their tools, accepts payment, some dried fish, a small piece of carved antler, and leaves as quietly as they arrived. The longhouse seems lighter somehow. The same smoke, the same smells, the same cramped quarters, but the atmosphere has shifted. Hope is a powerful medicine, even when it's based on things that can't be proven or measured. The woman returns to her work, checking on the sick person one more time before moving on to other tasks. She adds more herbs to the broth that's simmering over the fire. She checks the young man's hand, the one that was cut earlier, and seems satisfied with how the wound is closing. She speaks briefly with an elderly man who's complaining of joint pain, then goes to her shelves and returns with a jar of something that smells sharp and medicinal. The jar contains a salve made from birch bark and animal fat. She rubs it into the old man's knuckles, and you can see him grimace at first, then gradually relax as the salve begins to work. Birch bark contains salicylic acid, the same compound that's in aspirin. The Vikings didn't know that, of course. They just knew it helped with pain. You're starting to see the pattern now. Everything they used had a reason, even if that reason was based on observation rather than scientific understanding. They watched what worked, they remembered it, they passed it down, they refined it over generations. And when something didn't work, they tried something else. But what about the things that couldn't be fixed? What about the people who didn't recover no matter what remedies were tried, no matter how many vulvas were consulted? That's where the Viking approach to medicine became something else entirely, something darker and more honest than most societies are willing to be. Because the Vikings understood that death was part of life, and when death was coming, there were specific things you did to help someone die well. Not just die well. There's a difference. You're still in the longhouse, and the night is deepening into that particular quality of darkness that feels almost solid. The fire has been built up again, casting long shadows that stretch and waver across the walls. Most people have settled into their sleeping spots, benches, platforms, piles of furs and straw. The air is filled with the sounds of breathing, snoring, the occasional cough or murmur. But you notice that the woman who's been tending to the sick isn't sleeping. She's sitting near the fire, working on something with steady, practiced movements. You move closer and see that she's preparing food, not the medicinal broths or fermented fish. This is different. She's cutting thin slices of smoked meat, arranging them on a wooden platter alongside dried berries and something that looks like flatbread. Her movements are careful, almost ceremonial. She glances up as you approach, and something in her expression makes you pause. This food, you realize, isn't for the sick person who's been recovering. This is for someone else, someone who isn't getting better. You hadn't noticed before, but now you see them, an older man lying on a bench in the far corner of the longhouse, away from the fire. His breathing is shallow and irregular. His skin has that greyish quality that means the body is shutting down. People walk past him, but they don't avoid him exactly. They acknowledge him. A hand on his shoulder, a quiet word, but no one is trying to feed him remedies anymore. They know. Everyone knows. The woman finishes arranging the food and carries it to the dying man. She sits beside him and speaks quietly, and you're close enough now to hear some of what she's saying. She's telling him about the food, describing it, where it came from, how it was prepared. She's not asking him to eat it. He's clearly too far gone for that. She's just describing it, honoring him. But I haven't told you why this matters yet, and it matters more than you might think. Because the Vikings believed that how you died determined where you went afterward. If you died in battle, you might go to Valhalla or Folkvanga. If you died at sea, maybe Ran would claim you. But if you died of sickness or old age in your bed, that was hell's domain. Not the Christian hell, something different, a place of shadows and quiet, neither punishment nor reward, just rest. And so when someone was dying of illness, the goal wasn't to fight death. The goal was to help them die properly, with dignity, with their family around them, with food prepared for their journey, even if they couldn't eat it, with words spoken that would be carried into whatever came next. The woman stays beside the dying man, and gradually others gather. His children maybe, grandchildren, friends. They sit in a rough circle around his bench, and someone begins to speak. They're telling stories, remembering things he did, places he traveled, ships he built, arguments he won, jokes he told. They're constructing a verbal monument to his life, and he's still alive to hear it, though you're not sure if he's conscious enough to understand. His breathing is getting slower, longer pauses between breaths. Everyone in the circle notices, but no one panics. No one tries to intervene. They just keep talking, keep remembering, keep bearing witness. And then, between one breath and the next, he's gone. The silence that follows isn't shocked or anguished. It's respectful, acknowledging. Someone closes his eyes. Someone else pulls the furs up over his face. The woman who prepared the food places the platter beside his body. It will stay there until morning, when the burial preparations begin. You feel something heavy settle in your chest. Not sadness exactly. Something more complicated. Recognition maybe, of the reality that this happened all the time. That death was so much more present in Viking life than it is in yours. That everyone in this longhouse has probably watched dozens of people die. Will probably watch dozens more. And yet they keep going, keep living, keep finding reasons to laugh and work, and tell stories, and care for each other. The circle breaks up gradually. People return to their sleeping spots. The fire burns lower. Outside you can hear the wind has picked up even more, and now there's the soft sound of snow beginning to fall. That particular whisper hiss that means winter is settling in for real. But the sick person, the one who was recovering earlier, is still alive, still breathing steadily, still improving, slowly but measurably. The contrast is stark. One person dying while another person heals, both in the same room, separated by maybe 20 feet. That's how it was. Death and life, sickness and health, all mixed together in the same smoky, fish-smelling space. No separation. No sterile hospital rooms. No way to pretend that death was something that happened somewhere else. To other people. At times convenient for no one to be around. The woman returns to her spot by the fire and resumes her work. There's always more work. More herbs to prepare. More remedies to mix. More people who will need help, either to heal or to die well. You wonder how she does it. How she maintains the energy, the focus, the emotional resilience to do this night after night, winter after winter. But then you realize, she doesn't have a choice. None of them do. This is survival. This is what community means when your options are limited and your resources are scarce. You help each other. You share knowledge. You do what works. And when nothing works, you stay present anyway. But there's still something I haven't told you yet. Something about what happened after death. Because the Vikings didn't just let someone die and move on. There were specific things that had to be done with the body. And some of those things had surprising connections to medicine. You wake, though you're not sure you were actually asleep, to find that morning has come. Well, morning is a generous term. The light filtering through the gaps in the walls is grey and weak, barely enough to see by. But people are moving, which means it's time to start the day. The fire is being rebuilt. Someone is already preparing porridge. Children are being dressed in layers of wool and fur. The longhouse is returning to life. Except for the corner where the dead man lies. That corner is quiet, purposeful. Several people are gathered there now, including the woman who's been doing the medical work, and they're preparing the body for burial. You move closer, careful not to intrude, and watch what they're doing. First, they wash the body. The water is cold. There's no point wasting hot water on someone who can't feel it, but they're thorough. They clean every part of him, paying special attention to his hands and face. Then they dress him in clean clothes. Not his best clothes necessarily, but good ones. Ones that are whole and warm and fit for traveling. But here's where it gets interesting. They're also checking the body, carefully, systematically. The woman examines his hands, his arms, his feet. She's looking at old scars, old injuries, seeing how they healed. She's noting which bones were broken during his life and how they set. She's observing the state of his teeth, his skin, his joints. She's reading his body the same way she might read a particularly detailed book about what it means to live to old age as a Viking. And she's learning from it. Because every body told a story. Every scar, every healed fracture, every sign of disease was information. If she saw that a broken leg had healed straight and strong, she remembered what treatment had been used. If she saw signs of an infection that someone had survived, she noted it. If she saw evidence of illnesses that had killed them, she paid attention to that too. This was how medical knowledge accumulated, not through written texts or formal schools, but through observation, through touching actual bodies, seeing actual results, remembering actual outcomes. But I haven't told you what they did with the information yet, and that's the part that might surprise you. Some of it got incorporated into remedies. If someone noticed that a person who ate a lot of fish liver had stronger bones in old age, that became knowledge. If someone observed that people who drank birch sap in spring seemed to have fewer infections, that became practice. If someone saw that wounds treated with certain herbs healed faster and cleaner, that became standard. But some of it became warning, became prevention, became the kind of knowledge that helped people avoid getting sick in the first place. The woman finishes her examination and nods to the others. They wrap the body in a shroud made of wool and leather, binding it carefully with leather straps. Someone brings the platter of food that was prepared the night before, and it gets placed in the shroud as well. Food for the journey, even if that journey is only to Hell's domain. Then they carry the body outside, and you follow. The snow is falling steadily now, not heavy but persistent. The ground is covered in a thin layer of white, and your breath steams in the cold air. The burial will happen today. They can't wait. Winter makes the ground harder to dig with each passing day. Several men are already at work with shovels and picks, breaking through the frozen earth near the edge of the settlement. You watch them work for a while, the rhythm of it hypnotic. Dig, lift, toss, dig, lift, toss. The hole deepens gradually, dark earth piling up beside it. The snow continues to fall, landing on the growing mound of soil and melting slowly. Back in the longhouse, life has fully resumed. The sick person who was recovering is sitting up now, eating porridge slowly but steadily. The child with the burned arm is playing with the other children, her arm still wrapped but clearly bothering her less. The young man with the cut hand is helping to repair something, working carefully to avoid straining the wound. Small victories, all of them. People who might have died but didn't. People who will live to work another season, raise another generation, tell another story. And that, really, is what Viking medicine was about. Not curing everything, not preventing all death. Those goals were impossible, and the Vikings knew it. Instead, it was about maintaining, about keeping people functional enough to contribute, about preserving the community's collective strength through winters and famines and plagues, and all the other things that tried to grind them down. It was about being pragmatic, about using what worked, about not wasting resources on false hope, about knowing when to fight and when to accept, about staying present for both the healing and the dying. But there was one more thing they did when people got sick, one more layer to their medical practice that we haven't touched on yet, and it involved something that might seem strange to you, but made perfect sense to them. They moved people, not far, just strategically. You notice it now, watching the longhouse reorganize itself after the death. The sick person who's recovering gets moved closer to the fire. The person with the joint pain gets moved to a spot where the draft from the door won't hit them. Children get kept away from anyone with a cough. People with fevers get positioned where they can be monitored easily. It's environmental medicine, microclimate management, the acknowledgement that where you are in the space affects how your body functions, and in a world where you couldn't control much about your environment, controlling the little things, who sat where, who got the warmest spot, who was exposed to drafts, mattered enormously. Simple, practical, effective, the Viking way. You're standing outside now, watching the burial, and the cold is starting to seep through your clothes in that insistent way that makes you understand why the Vikings wore so many layers. The hole is deep enough now. The wrapped body is lowered carefully, respectfully, into the frozen earth. The men who dug the grave begin filling it in, and the sound of earth hitting the shroud is muffled, almost gentle. Someone is speaking, words you can't fully understand, but the tone is clear. Farewell, safe journey, may the earth rest lightly. Around the gravesite you notice other mounds, some older, covered in snow and almost invisible, some newer, still clearly defined. This is how communities marked themselves in the landscape, through the presence of their dead, through the continuity of burial sites that stretched back generations. You turn back toward the longhouse, and the woman who's been doing the medical work is there beside you. She's looking at the grave, But her expression isn't sad exactly, more contemplative, like she's filing away information for later use. She gestures for you to follow her, and you do, grateful to get back inside where it's warm. But she doesn't go to the fire. Instead, she leads you to the storage area where all the remedies are kept, and she begins to explain something. Her Norse is too fast for you to catch all of it, but you understand the general idea. She's talking about prevention, about how most of what she does isn't treating sickness, it's trying to prevent it from happening in the first place. She shows you how food is stored. Everything is kept in specific ways to prevent spoilage. Smoked fish hangs from the rafters, where the smoke from the fire will keep it dry and preserved. Dried meat is packed in salt. Grains are kept in sealed containers to keep out moisture and vermin. Root vegetables are stored in pits dug into the earth outside, where the cold will preserve them but they won't freeze solid. This is medicine, she seems to be saying. This is how you keep people from getting sick from bad food, because food poisoning, in a time before modern sanitation or refrigeration, could kill you as surely as any fever. But I haven't told you about the water yet, and the water is crucial. Because the Vikings understood something that many medieval societies didn't quite grasp. Water could make you sick. They didn't know about bacteria or parasites, but they knew that drinking from certain sources led to illness, while drinking from other sources didn't, so they were selective. Springs and fast-moving streams were good. Standing water was bad. Water from areas where animals gathered, or where waste might accumulate, was avoided. And if you weren't sure about the water, you boiled it. Or, more commonly, you drank ale instead. Ale was safer than water for a simple reason. The brewing process involved boiling. The alcohol content was usually low enough to give the liquid some flavor and preservation qualities, but not enough to get you drunk in the middle of the day when you had work to do. Everyone drank ale. Children drank ale. Pregnant women drank ale. It was the default beverage, safer and more reliable than water. The woman shows you the brewing area, where large clay vessels sit fermenting. The smell is yeasty, slightly sour, not unpleasant. She dips a wooden cup into one of the vessels and offers it to you. You taste it carefully. It's thin, slightly sweet, with a flavor that's somewhere between beer and bread. Not something you'd choose for pleasure maybe, but something you could drink all day without thinking twice about it. And that's the point. It's functional. Like everything else in Viking medicine, it serves a purpose, and that purpose is survival. She moves on, showing you other preventive measures, the way they clean their tools, knives, cutting boards, cooking vessels, scrubbing them with sand and ash to remove food particles and potential contamination. The way they dispose of waste, carrying it well away from the living areas and burying it. The way they monitor each other for signs of illness, catching problems early when they're still manageable. You're starting to understand that Viking medicine wasn't just about treating sick people, it was about maintaining a baseline of health for the entire community. About creating conditions where illness was less likely to take hold. About building systems, practical, unglamorous systems, that kept people functional. But there's something else, something she hasn't shown you yet, and you can tell from her expression that it's important. She leads you to a different part of the storage area, where there's a collection of items that don't seem to fit with the dried herbs and animal parts. There are stones, smooth, round stones in various sizes. There are wooden sticks, carved and polished. There are pieces of leather with strange markings. These, you realize, are the tools of physical therapy, Viking style. You watch as the woman picks up one of the stones and demonstrates its use. She places it on the ground and rolls her foot over it, pressing down with varying amounts of pressure. It's for people with foot pain, she explains, through gestures and simple words you can pass. People who spend all day standing, walking, working. The stone helps work out the tight spots, the sore places, the areas where muscles have knotted up from overuse. The wooden sticks are similar tools for working on backs, shoulders, legs. You can massage your own muscles with them, or someone else can use them on you. They're shaped specifically for reaching difficult spots, for applying pressure in targeted ways. They're simple, but they work. And the leather pieces with markings? Those are guides, visual reminders of where to press, where to massage, where to apply heat or cold for different types of pain. They're mnemonic devices, ways of remembering which treatments work for which problems. This is rehabilitation medicine. The acknowledgement that injuries don't just heal on their own, they need help. Movement, Stimulation. Careful, consistent attention over time. The woman calls over the older man with joint pain, the one who received the birch bark salve earlier. She has him sit on a bench and begins working on his hands with one of the wooden tools, methodically pressing and rolling it across his swollen knuckles. He grimaces at first, but gradually his expression eases. She's not just treating the pain, she's maintaining his mobility, keeping his hands functional for as long as possible. Because hands matter. In a society where almost all work is manual, where you need to grip tools and weapons and ropes and oars, losing hand function means losing your ability to contribute. And losing your ability to contribute means becoming dependent, becoming a burden, becoming vulnerable. So you maintain, you treat, you work on keeping people moving even when it hurts, even when it's easier to just let them rest. But I haven't told you about the children yet, and the children are where Viking medicine gets particularly interesting. Because children were vulnerable, infant mortality was high. Some estimates suggest that nearly half of all children died before reaching adulthood. Disease, injury, malnutrition, accidents. All of these took their toll. And yet the Vikings had specific practices designed to give children the best possible chance. You notice a woman in the corner of the longhouse nursing a baby. The baby is wrapped tightly in soft wool, swaddled in a way that keeps their limbs secure and their body warm. This was standard practice. Swaddling protected fragile infant bodies, kept them from getting cold, and seemed to help them sleep more peacefully. But there was more to it than just wrapping them up. The nursing mother is drinking something, not ale, something else, something that smells herbal and slightly bitter. The woman who's been teaching you about remedies notices your attention and explains it's a tea made from fennel and dill seeds. It increases milk production and also passes through to the baby, helping with digestion and colic. Breastfeeding was understood to be crucial, not just for nutrition, but for protection. Babies who were breastfed seemed to get sick less often, seemed to be stronger, seemed to have better odds of surviving their vulnerable first years. The Vikings didn't know about antibodies or immune system development, but they knew what worked. And when a mother couldn't breastfeed, they found a wet nurse. Or they made a substitute from cow's or goat's milk, mixed with honey and water, fed carefully from a cow's horn that had been cleaned and hollowed out. It wasn't as good as breast milk, and babies fed this way had higher mortality rates, but it was better than nothing. You watch as an older child, maybe 4 or 5 years old, comes running into the longhouse, crying and holding their knee. They've fallen, scraped it badly on something. Blood is seeping through torn fabric, and the child is more scared than hurt. The woman kneels down to their level, speaking quietly, soothingly. She examines the knee, determines it's not serious, and begins cleaning it with water. The child is still crying, but less frantically now. She applies honey to the scrape, then wraps it with clean cloth. Then, and this is the part that catches your attention, she gives the child something to hold. A small carved figure, maybe a horse or a bear, something smooth and pleasant to touch. Distraction, comfort. The acknowledgement that treating pain isn't just physical, it's emotional, that children need reassurance as much as they need medicine, that fear makes pain worse, and calm makes pain more bearable. The child stops crying, clutching the carved figure, and wanders off to rejoin the other children playing. The woman stands, brushes off her hands, and returns to her other tasks. You realize you've been watching her work for hours now, maybe longer, and in that time you've seen her treat 6 different ailments, prepare countless remedies, teach others through demonstration, and maintain a level of competence and calm that seems almost supernatural. But it's not supernatural. It's just experience. Years and years of practice, of watching, of learning what works and what doesn't, of building a body of knowledge that exists primarily in her hands and memory, and the hands and memories of the other women who do this work. Because it was mostly women, the routine medical care, the everyday remedies, the preventive measures, all of that fell to women. Men might set broken bones from battle injuries, or treat specific combat wounds, But the day-to-day work of keeping a community healthy, that was women's work. And it was work. Constant, demanding, essential work. But there's still more to learn. More layers to how the Vikings approach sickness and health. And some of those layers involve things that might make you uncomfortable. Because the Vikings, for all their practical medical knowledge, also believed in things that we would consider purely superstition. And sometimes those beliefs shaped their medical practices in ways that were complicated. You're sitting by the fire again, and someone is telling a story. Not a saga exactly, something more personal. A memory about someone who got sick years ago, someone who recovered after everyone thought they would die. And the reason they recovered, according to the storyteller, had nothing to do with remedies or care. It was because they wore the right amulet, because they said the right words, because they made the right offering to the right deity at the right time. The people listening nod along. Some of them look skeptical, but not many. Most seem to accept this explanation as perfectly reasonable, as compatible with everything else they know about healing. And here's the thing. It probably was compatible in their worldview, because the Vikings didn't separate physical causes from spiritual ones the way we do. They didn't think in terms of this illness is caused by bacteria versus this illness is caused by magic. They thought in terms of layers, multiple causes operating simultaneously. The fever might be caused by bad air and by the displeasure of a spirit. The wound might be infected because it wasn't cleaned properly, and because someone cursed you. So you treated both. You applied honey and herbs, and you wore protective runes. You drank the medicinal broth, and you made offerings to the gods. You did everything, because why wouldn't you? If multiple forces could cause harm, then multiple forces might be needed to heal. The woman who's been treating people all day reaches into her pouch and pulls out several small objects. Carved bone pieces, each one marked with different runes. She doesn't use them for every patient you've noticed, but for some, particularly those with illnesses that aren't responding to physical treatments. She brings out the runes. She casts them on the ground, reads the patterns they make, and based on that reading, she might change her treatment approach. Not drastically, not abandoning the practical remedies, but adding layers, suggesting the person wear a specific amulet, recommending they make an offering at a particular shrine, advising them to avoid certain activities or foods until the runes show more favorable patterns. Is this medicine, or is it magic? The answer, frustratingly, is both, and neither. And it doesn't really matter, because from a Viking perspective, those categories don't exist. Everything is interconnected. Everything affects everything else. But I haven't told you about the bleeding yet, and the bleeding is where things get particularly strange from a modern medical perspective. Because the Vikings, like many medieval societies, believed in bloodletting, the idea that removing bad blood could cure certain illnesses, and they had specific tools for it, small blades kept sharp and clean, cups made from animal horn for collecting the blood, techniques for making precise cuts in specific locations. You watch as someone enters the longhouse complaining of severe headaches that have lasted for days. The woman examines them, asks questions about the quality of the pain, the timing, whether anything makes it better or worse. Then she nods to herself and prepares for bloodletting. She selects a spot on the person's arm, cleans it thoroughly, and makes a small, precise cut. Blood flows out, dark red, into the horn cup. Not a huge amount, maybe a cup's worth, maybe less. She watches it carefully, judging when to stop based on criteria you can't quite discern. Then she presses a cloth soaked in something astringent against the cut, holds it there until the bleeding stops, and bandages it carefully. The person with the headache is instructed to rest, to drink plenty of ale, to eat something with salt. And remarkably, over the next day or so, their headache does seem to improve. Why? Modern medicine would probably say the improvement had nothing to do with the bloodletting. Maybe the headache was tension-related, and the ritual of treatment helped them relax. Maybe it was a migraine that was going to resolve on its own anyway. Maybe the enforced rest after the procedure was what actually helped. But from a Viking perspective, the bloodletting worked. The person got better. Therefore the treatment was valid. And honestly, that's the only metric that mattered to them. Results, outcomes, survival. Not theory, not understanding the mechanism, just did the person live or die? Did they get better or worse? Can they work or can't they? You realize you're getting tired, not physically tired, you don't think you actually have a body in this place, this time, but mentally tired, overwhelmed by the complexity of it all, the layers upon layers of practice and belief and pragmatism and superstition, all tangled together in ways that resist easy categorization. The woman notices your fatigue somehow. She gestures to an empty spot on a bench near the fire and indicates you should rest. You do, settling into the furs and wool, and the warmth seeps into you gradually. Around you, the longhouse continues its rhythm. People eating, working, talking, sleeping, children playing, babies crying, the sick recovering or not recovering, the healthy staying healthy or becoming sick. The endless cycle of human life compressed into this single smoky space, where everyone knows everyone, and privacy is impossible, and survival depends on cooperation. You close your eyes for a moment, just to rest them, and when you open them again, time has shifted. It might be hours later, might be days. The light is different, or maybe it's just the fire burning at a different intensity. The sick person who was recovering is up now, walking slowly but steadily. They're helping with small tasks, contributing again, reintegrated into the community's work. Victory. The child with the burned arm is playing rough with the other children. The bandage gone, just a faint scar visible on the skin. Another victory. The young man with the cut hand is using both hands normally. The wound healed enough that he's not favoring it anymore. Victory. Small victories, all of them. But they accumulate. They matter. You're watching the daily routine unfold, and you start to notice something else about Viking medicine that you hadn't fully appreciated before. It's social. Deeply, fundamentally social. Every remedy involves multiple people. The person gathering herbs, the person preparing them, the person administering them, the family members who sit with the sick person, the neighbors who bring food, the community members who share knowledge and advice and stories about similar illnesses they've seen before. No one heals alone, no one gets sick alone either. The woman is teaching someone now, a younger woman, maybe her daughter or niece. She's showing her how to prepare a particular remedy, explaining not just the steps but the why behind each step. Why this herb and not that one? Why this amount and not more or less? Why you add it at this temperature and not when the water is boiling? The younger woman asks questions, her hands mimicking the older woman's movements. She's learning not from a book or a formal school, but from observation and practice and repetition. This is how medical knowledge transfers in oral cultures, through apprenticeship, through watching and doing, and eventually becoming capable enough to teach the next generation. But there's an element of secrecy to it too. Some remedies, you notice, are only discussed in whispers. Some preparations happen when fewer people are around. Some knowledge is clearly considered powerful, even dangerous, and is only shared with those deemed ready to handle it responsibly. This makes sense when you think about it. In a society without formal medical licensing or oversight, reputation was everything. If you had knowledge that others didn't, that made you valuable, essential, it gave you status, and ensured you'd be taken care of in your old age. So you protected that knowledge. You didn't share everything with everyone. You were selective about your apprentices. You maintained a certain mystique around the most powerful or unusual remedies. The woman finishes her teaching session, and the younger woman nods, satisfied or at least feeling like she's learned something useful. She takes the remedy she's prepared, something involving honey and crushed herbs, and carries it to someone on the other side of the longhouse. You stand and stretch, working out stiffness from sitting too long, and decide to explore more of the settlement. The woman doesn't stop you, so you step outside into the cold. The snow has stopped, but the ground is thoroughly covered now. Everything is white and grey, and the particular shade of blue that winter skies get. Other longhouses are visible nearby, smoke rising from their roofs. People are moving between buildings, carrying things, working on outdoor tasks that can't wait despite the weather. You notice a smaller structure set slightly apart from the main buildings. The woman follows your gaze and explains that's where they isolate people with certain types of sickness. Not all sickness. Most people stay in the main longhouse where they can be watched and cared for easily. But diseases that seem to spread from person to person, those get special treatment. You walk closer to the isolation house, and the woman calls out a greeting. Someone answers from inside, a voice that sounds congested, weak, but alive. The woman doesn't enter. She sets down a basket near the door, food probably, and remedies, and steps back. This is quarantine, Viking style. Imperfect, since they didn't understand disease transmission in any modern sense, but effective enough that they recognized certain illnesses required separation, that keeping a sick person away from healthy people sometimes prevented the sickness from spreading. But I haven't told you about the preventive rituals yet, and those are fascinating. Because the Vikings had specific times of year when they did large-scale preventive health measures. Spring particularly was important. After the long winter of close quarters and limited food and inevitable illness, spring was when you cleaned everything. The longhouses would be emptied of their accumulated winter filth, literally months of smoke residue, food scraps that had fallen through the floorboards, general grime and dirtiness that came from that many people living in that smaller space. Everything that could be moved outside would be. Furs and woolens would be beaten and aired, floors would be scrubbed with sand and water, walls would be scraped clean of built-up tar and soot. It was exhausting work, but it was also necessary work, because that accumulated filth harbored pests and disease and general unhealthiness. And then there were the spring tonics, specific foods and drinks consumed intentionally to restore health after winter's deprivations. Fresh greens, the first shoots of wild plants that emerged as the snow melted. Pine needle tea, rich in vitamin C. Birch sap, tapped directly from the trees and drunk fresh. Fish liver, to restore nutrients depleted during the winter months. No one called it treating scurvy or addressing vitamin deficiencies. They just knew that people who ate these things in spring felt better, had more energy, seemed healthier overall. So it became tradition, became ritual, became something everyone did because that's what you did in spring. You're starting to see how much of Viking medicine was actually public health, community-wide practices that benefited everyone, not just individuals, standards of cleanliness and food preparation and waste disposal that, while far from modern standards, were still better than nothing. Social expectations that you'd help care for your neighbors, that you'd share medical knowledge, that you'd contribute to the collective health of the settlement. The woman calls you back inside. It's too cold to stand around outside for long, and you return to the warmth gratefully. Inside, preparations are being made for a meal. Not a simple one either. Something more elaborate, with multiple dishes, suggesting this is a special occasion. You watch as food is arranged and realize what's happening. This is a celebration. The sick person who was recovered enough to walk is now recovered enough to work, which means they're recovered enough to celebrate. There will be food and ale and probably stories, and definitely the sense of relief that comes from someone surviving when they might not have. It's a small thing in the grand scheme of Viking life, but it's also everything. Because this is what all the remedies and rituals and knowledge and hard work were for. Moments like this, people surviving, communities staying intact, life continuing despite everything that tried to stop it. You're sitting at the celebration, and the food is better than anything you've seen in the longhouse so far. There's roasted meat seal probably, or maybe reindeer. The fat glistens in the firelight, and the smell makes your mouth water even though you're not sure you can actually taste anything in this strange observer state you're in. There's flatbread, fresh and warm, spread with butter that's been mixed with herbs. There are dried berries reconstituted in honey. There's even some kind of stew with root vegetables and barley, thick and steaming. And there's ale. Lots of ale, stronger than the everyday stuff, with a deeper flavor that suggests it's been aging for a while, saved for occasions exactly like this one. People are eating with enthusiasm, talking loudly, laughing. The recovered person is at the center of attention, looking tired but happy, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone. Someone starts a song, something rhythmic and repetitive that everyone seems to know the words to. The children are running around, getting underfoot, being gently redirected by adults who are too cheerful to be genuinely annoyed. This is community medicine, you realize, the psychological and social component that's just as important as the physical treatments. The message being sent is clear. We fought for you, and you survived, and we're all better off for it. You matter. Your recovery matters. We're celebrating, because keeping you alive was worth the effort. But I haven't told you about the trade networks yet, and the trade networks are where Viking medicine gets really interesting. Because the Vikings didn't just use local remedies, they had access to materials from all over the known world, thanks to their extensive trading routes. Amber from the Baltic, silver from the East, silk from Constantinople, and, crucially, medicinal substances that didn't grow in Scandinavia. You notice the woman has joined the celebration, and someone is asking her about a particular remedy. She reaches into her pouch and pulls out something that definitely didn't come from anywhere nearby. It looks like dried plant material, but the color is wrong, too bright, too exotic. She explains that it came from a trader who came through in the fall, someone who'd traveled from the Mediterranean. This is imported medicine. Expensive, rare, reserved for special cases or important people. But it exists, and its existence means that Viking medicine wasn't isolated or primitive. It was connected to a broader network of medical knowledge that stretched across continents. Traders brought back not just materials, but information. Stories about remedies used in other places, techniques for treating illnesses that Scandinavian healers had never encountered, ideas about how the body worked, how disease spread, how healing happened. Some of this information was accurate, some was nonsense, but all of it got incorporated into the growing body of Viking medical knowledge, tested through practical application, and either kept or discarded based on results. The woman is telling a story now about a trader who brought back something called dragon's blood, which sounds magical, but was actually a red resin from a tree that grew somewhere far to the south. It was supposed to stop bleeding, and apparently it worked remarkably well. She used it on a severe injury once, someone who'd been gored by a bull, and the bleeding stopped almost immediately. She's been trying to get more of it ever since, but the traders who carry it are unpredictable, and it's expensive. You're reminded again of how practical the Vikings were. They didn't care if something was called dragon's blood, or tree resin, or magic powder from the gods. They cared if it worked. And if it worked, they wanted more of it. The celebration continues, growing louder and more boisterous as people drink more ale, and the initial formality gives way to genuine relaxation. Someone has started arm wrestling. Someone else is telling an extremely long story about a fishing trip that apparently went spectacularly wrong in entertaining ways. Children are being put to bed, protesting, then falling asleep almost immediately once they're settled in their furs. And through it all, the fire keeps burning. The smoke keeps rising. The smell of fish and smoke and humanity keeps permeating everything. This is the context for Viking medicine. Not sterile rooms and trained professionals and clear boundaries between sick and well, but this messy, communal, integrated into every other aspect of life. Medicine happening in the same space where people eat and sleep and work and play. Healers who are also mothers, and traders and farmers and neighbors. Remedies that are also food, also ritual, also social bonding. You stand and move toward the door, needing air again, needing a break from the intensity of so many people in such a small space. Outside, the night is clear now, stars visible in a way they never are in your own time. The cold hits you immediately, sharp and clarifying. You can see your breath, watch it dissipate into the darkness. Somewhere nearby, an animal makes a sound, a dog maybe, or something wild. The snow crunches under your feet as you walk a short distance from the longhouse. Behind you, the celebration continues, muffled by walls and distance but still audible. In front of you, darkness and cold and the vast indifferent universe that doesn't care whether Vikings live or die, whether their remedies work or fail, whether their communities survive or collapse. And yet they persist. They keep trying. They keep developing new remedies, passing down knowledge, taking care of each other. Not because they're guaranteed success, but because the alternative, giving up, doing nothing, letting people die without even trying, is unthinkable. That's the real heart of Viking medicine, you realize. Not any specific remedy or technique, But that fundamental refusal to give up, that insistence on doing something, even when the odds are terrible and the resources are limited and death is always waiting just outside the firelight. You return to the longhouse when the cold becomes too much and the celebration is winding down. People are settling into their sleeping spots, conversation dropping to murmurs, the energy of the evening dissipating into the drowsy contentment that comes after good food and good company. The fire is burning lower, and someone banks it carefully for the night, making sure it won't go out but won't burn too hot either. The woman finds you somehow, even though you're not sure you're actually visible to her. Or maybe she's just checking on everyone, making her rounds one last time before she allows herself to rest. She moves through the longhouse quietly, pausing at each sleeping person, checking breathing, checking color, checking for signs of fever or distress. This is night watch, another aspect of Viking medicine that rarely gets discussed. Someone always stayed alert, or at least semi-alert, in case of emergencies. A child waking with a croup cough that needed steam treatment, a fever spiking suddenly, a wound starting to bleed again, someone having trouble breathing. You couldn't just put everyone to bed and hope for the best. You had to maintain vigilance, especially in winter when people were more vulnerable, when cold could kill as easily as any disease. The woman finishes her rounds and finally settles into her own sleeping spot, but you notice she doesn't fully relax. Even lying down, wrapped in furs, her attention is still partially on the longhouse, ready to wake if needed. How long can someone maintain that level of vigilance? How many years of interrupted sleep, of constant alertness, of carrying the weight of community health on their shoulders? You don't have an answer, but you suspect it aged people in ways that had nothing to do with physical years. The longhouse falls into genuine quiet now, just the sounds of breathing, the occasional snore, the crackle of the fire, the wind outside. You let yourself sink into the rhythm of it, the peaceful monotony of a community at rest. But I haven't told you about the travelers yet, and travelers were crucial to Viking medicine in ways that aren't immediately obvious. Because when travelers arrived at a settlement, they brought disease with them, new infections, new illnesses, things the local population had no immunity to. This was dangerous. But travelers also brought new knowledge, new remedies, news about outbreaks in other areas that might be heading this way. So there was always a tension when strangers arrived. Welcome them and risk introducing disease, turn them away and lose potential knowledge and trade goods and news. The Vikings generally chose welcome hospitality was a sacred duty in Norse culture, but they were careful about it. Travelers would be observed closely for signs of illness. They'd be asked about conditions in the places they'd come from. If they showed any symptoms of disease, they might be kept separate from the main group, at least initially. Not refused shelter entirely, that would be a serious breach of hospitality, but managed carefully to minimize risk. And if a traveler had medical knowledge, if they were a healer themselves or had learned techniques from other cultures, they'd be questioned extensively. What remedies did they know? What diseases had they treated? What worked and what didn't? This is how medical knowledge spread in the Viking Age. Through conversation, through observation, through the constant movement of people across vast distances. A remedy developed in Norway might make its way to Iceland through a series of travelers, each one carrying the knowledge and passing it on. A technique used in Kiev might end up being practiced in Dublin, adapted and modified along the way. You imagine the networks of information crisscrossing the Viking world, ship to ship, port to port, settlement to settlement, slow by modern standards but remarkably effective given the technology available. A web of knowledge that no single person could possibly hold in its entirety, but which was accessible to anyone willing to ask questions and listen to answers. The woman shifts in her sleep, and you wonder what she dreams about. Remedies? Probably. Patients she's treated, some successfully and some not. Knowledge passed down from her mother and grandmother, mixed with things she's learned herself through trial and error and observation. In the morning it will all begin again. Someone will get sick or injured. Someone else will need preventive care or routine treatment. The woman will prepare remedies, offer advice, read bodies like texts written in symptoms and signs. The community will continue its endless cycle of work and rest, sickness and health, life and death. But for now, there's just sleep, the most fundamental medicine of all. the body's own healing mechanism, working in darkness and quiet while consciousness takes a break from its vigilance. You feel yourself drifting too, not quite sleeping but not quite awake either. The longhouse feels safe, despite the cold outside, despite the dangers that winter brings, despite everything that could go wrong. There's something about being surrounded by other human bodies, all breathing together in the darkness, that feels protective, ancient, right. This is what we lost, maybe, when we separated sick people into hospitals, when we professionalized medicine, when we cleaned everything and sterilized everything, and made healing happen in spaces dedicated only to that purpose. We gained precision and effectiveness, and survival rates that Vikings couldn't have imagined. But we lost this. The integration, the community, the sense that healing is something we do together, not something professionals do to us in special buildings designed for that purpose. You're not sure which is better. Probably the modern way, honestly. You'll take antibiotics over fermented fish any day. But still, there's something here worth remembering. Something about the social nature of healing, about the importance of presence and community, and the simple act of caring for each other. The fire shifts, sending up a small shower of sparks that disappear into the darkness above. Someone coughs softly, then settles back into sleep. Outside, the wind has died down, leaving just cold and silence and stars. And here, in this smoky longhouse somewhere in Viking Age Scandinavia, the business of survival continues, unremarkable, unglamorous, essential. You wake, if you ever really slept, to the sounds of morning beginning again. It's subtle at first, someone adding wood to the fire, trying to be quiet but not quite managing it, a baby fussing, then being soothed, the creak of wooden boards as people shift position, the long, drawn-out yawn of someone who didn't sleep well. Gradually the longhouse returns to life, people emerging from their furs and beginning the day's routines. The woman is already up, of course. You're starting to suspect she doesn't really sleep, just closes her eyes occasionally while remaining fundamentally alert. She's checking on the recovered person first, and you can see the satisfaction on her face when she finds them looking even better than yesterday. Color in their cheeks, eyes clear, movements more energetic. Another victory, another person pulled back from the edge. But this morning, there's something different happening. You can feel a tension in the air that wasn't there before. People are moving with more purpose, speaking in lower voices, glancing toward the door more frequently than usual. Something is coming, or maybe something has already arrived. The door opens, bringing a blast of cold air, and a young man enters. He's breathing hard, like he's been running. Snow clings to his clothes and hair. He speaks quickly in Old Norse, and even though you can't catch every word, the tone is clear. This is urgent. This is serious. There's been an accident at another settlement, something involving ice, a fall, multiple injuries. They need help. They need the woman specifically, because she's known in the area for her skill. They need her now. She doesn't hesitate. Within minutes she's gathering supplies, honey, clean cloth, dried herbs, the bog butter for burns, tools for stitching wounds. She moves with practiced efficiency, selecting items and packing them into a leather bag that's clearly designed for exactly this purpose. A medical emergency kit, Viking style. She says something to the younger woman she was teaching yesterday, and you understand enough to know she's leaving her in charge. Specific instructions are given, which patients need checking, which remedies need preparing, what to do if certain emergencies arise. The younger woman nods, looking nervous but determined. Then the healer wraps herself in furs and follows the young man out into the cold. You follow too, because you need to see this, need to understand this mobile aspect of Viking medicine. Outside, the morning is grey and bitter. Your breath freezes in the air immediately. The young man is already moving, and the woman follows without complaint, despite the cold, despite the difficult terrain, despite the fact that she's probably been awake for most of the night. You walk, or float, or however you're moving through this vision beside them, as they make their way across the snow-covered landscape. The settlement they're heading toward is maybe a mile away, maybe more, far enough that it's a real journey in winter conditions. But I haven't told you about the networks yet. the informal networks of healers that existed across Viking territories. Because the woman isn't just helping a neighboring settlement out of pure altruism, though that's certainly part of it. She's also maintaining relationships, building reciprocity, ensuring that when her settlement needs help, and it will, eventually someone will come. This is how healthcare worked in a world without centralized systems or professional organizations. Through mutual aid, through the understanding that today you need me, tomorrow I might need you. As you walk, you pass other landmarks, standing stones, burial mounds, small shrines where offerings have been left, food, carved figures, pieces of jewelry. The woman pauses at one of these shrines, briefly, and adds something from her bag, a small bundle of herbs, wrapped in cloth, an offering, maybe for protection during this journey, or for success in treating whatever injuries await. The young man is talking as he leads the way, explaining what happened. Apparently several people were crossing a frozen inlet when the ice gave way. Most got out quickly, but a few went under. They were pulled out eventually, but they've been in the freezing water, and now there's concern about cold exposure, about internal injuries, about water in the lungs. This is exactly the kind of emergency that could wipe out a significant portion of a small settlement's population, if not handled correctly. The woman listens carefully, asking occasional questions, already planning her approach. You can see the settlement ahead now, smoke rising from longhouses, but something about the scene is wrong. Too much activity, people moving with the kind of urgency that means something bad has happened. The woman speeds up, and you follow her into one of the longhouses. Inside it's chaos, not panicked chaos, but the organized chaos of people trying to help without really knowing what they're doing. The injured are laid out on benches, wrapped in furs, and you can see immediately that some are in serious trouble. Blue-tinged skin, violent shivering, confused, unfocused eyes, hypothermia, though nobody here knows that word. The woman moves through them quickly, assessing who's most critical, who can wait, who needs immediate intervention and who needs careful monitoring. It's triage, essentially. The same calculation emergency medicine still does today. She points to the worst case. A man who's shivering has stopped, which seems like it should be good but is actually very bad. When you stop shivering, it means your body is shutting down, conserving its last resources for vital organs. She starts giving orders, and people scramble to follow them. You watch as the woman orchestrates the treatment of multiple patients simultaneously. For the man who stopped shivering, the most critical case, she orders him stripped of his wet clothes immediately. No time for modesty or privacy. The wet fabric is literally pulling heat out of his body, killing him by degrees. Dry furs are brought, and he's wrapped thoroughly, but not roughly. Gradual rewarming, not sudden heat that could shock his system. Someone is sent to prepare warm drinks. Not hot warm. The woman is very specific about this, because she knows somehow that giving someone in this condition boiling liquid can cause more problems. The drinks need to be body temperature, maybe slightly warmer. Ale mixed with honey. Broth if they can swallow it. For the others, those who are still shivering, which paradoxically means they're in better condition, the treatment is similar but less urgent. Dry clothes, warm coverings, monitoring for signs of worsening. One woman has a deep cut on her leg, probably from the ice or something sharp underwater, and that needs attention too. The healer kneels beside the injured woman and examines the wound. It's long but not deep, which is good. No major blood vessels cut, but it's contaminated with dirty water, which is bad. She begins cleaning it with water that's been boiled and allowed to cool slightly, picking out debris with careful fingers, making sure nothing's left behind that could cause infection later. The injured woman is crying, not from pain but from shock, from fear, from the overwhelming nature of having nearly died and now being hurt and cold and scared. The healer speaks to her constantly while she works. Soothing words, reassurance, the kind of steady, calm presence that helps someone stay grounded when their world has just been turned upside down. But I haven't told you about the complications yet, about what happens when cold water gets into the lungs. One of the rescued people is coughing, not the normal cough of someone who's cold and uncomfortable, but a wet, rattling cough that brings up water and foam. The healer hears it, and her expression changes. This is serious.
This is someone who inhaled water while under the ice, and now that water is in their lungs, and lungs filled with water can't exchange oxygen properly, and without oxygen. She moves to this patient quickly, positioning them carefully, not flat on their back, that makes the water pool in the lungs, not fully upright, that takes too much energy, at an angle, propped up with furs in a position that helps the lungs drain while minimizing the work of breathing. She prepares a steam treatment, hot water with herbs, something that smells like pine and mint and other things you can't identify. She creates a makeshift tent with cloth, trapping the steam around the patient's head, having them breathe it in. It won't remove the water from their lungs, but it might help loosen it, make it easier to cough up, reduce some of the inflammation. And then she waits, monitors, checks breathing every few minutes, adjusts position as needed. This patient might survive. They might not. The healer has done everything she knows how to do. Now it comes down to the person's body, their constitution, their luck. You watch her work for what feels like hours, moving between patients, adjusting treatments, making constant small decisions based on constant small observations. This person's breathing sounds a bit better. Good, continue what you're doing. This person's color is worse. Try this instead. This person is starting to shiver again. That's actually a good sign. Add more warmth. It's exhausting just to watch how she actually does it, hour after hour, maintaining focus and making critical decisions while probably hungry and cold herself, is beyond your comprehension. Eventually things stabilize. Not all the patients are out of danger, but none are actively dying either. The crisis has passed into the monitoring phase, where time will tell who recovers fully and who doesn't. The healer finally allows herself to sit. Someone brings her food, dried fish and bread and ale, and she eats mechanically, without enjoyment, just refueling. Around her, the people of this settlement are expressing gratitude. Thank you. You saved them. We couldn't have done this without you. She waves it off, not out of false modesty but because this is just what she does. This is her role. Tomorrow, or next month, or next year, her settlement might be the one in crisis, and someone from here will come to help. That's how it works. That's how everyone survives. But you notice she's also observing, watching how these people are organized, what supplies they have, what they're lacking. She's making mental notes, because information is valuable. If they have a remedy she doesn't know about, she wants to learn it. If they're missing something essential, she wants to remember to mention it, maybe facilitate trade. Medical knowledge flows both ways. Every emergency is also an opportunity to learn, to share, to strengthen the broader network of healing practices that keeps Viking communities alive. As the afternoon wears on, the healer makes preparations to leave. The crisis is managed, and her presence is more useful back at her own settlement. She gives final instructions to the local healers, such as they are, about monitoring the patients through the night, what to watch for, what to do if things go wrong, when to send for help again. Then she gathers her bag, now lighter since she's used many of her supplies, and heads back out into the cold. The walk back is slower. She's tired now, and the adrenaline that kept her moving during the crisis has faded. But she keeps going, because that's what you do. You keep going. You walk beside her in the dimming light, watching the landscape turn blue and grey as the sun sets somewhere behind thick clouds. The wind has picked up again, and snow is starting to fall. Light flurries at first, then heavier. The kind of snow that means a storm is coming. The healer pulls her furs tighter, and continues walking. Her face is set with determination, but you can see the exhaustion around her.
You're back in the familiar longhouse, and life has returned to its normal rhythm, as if the emergency never happened. Except it did happen, and the healer is different now. Not visibly, she's doing the same tasks, moving through the same routines, but there's a weariness to her that wasn't there before. Or maybe it was always there, and you're just noticing it now. The accumulated weight of years of this work, of carrying the health of an entire community on her shoulders, of making life and death decisions with incomplete information and limited resources. You watch her prepare a remedy for someone with a persistent cough. The movements are automatic now, muscle memory built over decades. She doesn't need to think about measurements or timing. Her hands know, but you notice she pauses occasionally, closing her eyes for just a moment, gathering herself before continuing. How long can someone do this work before it consumes them completely? The question hangs in the air unanswered, because there is no answer. You do the work until you can't anymore, until age or illness or exhaustion finally claims you, and then someone else takes over, and the cycle continues. But I haven't told you about the mental illnesses yet, and mental illness was something the Vikings definitely encountered, though they understood it very differently than we do. Depression, what they might have called heavy spirits or a darkening of the mind, was recognized as a real condition, especially in winter, especially during the long dark months when the sun barely appeared and everyone was confined to close quarters. People would stop eating, stop working, stop caring about anything. And the Vikings had responses to this. Sometimes those responses were physical, getting the person outside, even briefly, even in the cold. Exercise, movement, anything to break the cycle of lethargy. Special foods believed to lift the spirits, certain fish oils, honey, foods that were brighter in colour or richer in taste. But sometimes the responses were social, making sure the person wasn't isolated, involving them in tasks, even simple ones, telling stories specifically chosen to engage them, creating reasons for them to stay connected to the community. And sometimes the responses were spiritual, consultations with Velvas, rituals designed to address whatever spiritual imbalance might be causing the darkness, offerings made on the person's behalf. You watch as the healer consults with a family about one of their members, a young man who's been withdrawn for weeks, barely eating, barely speaking. The conversation is careful, respectful. The family is worried but also slightly ashamed, as if this is somehow their failure. The healer reassures them, matter of fact, that this happens sometimes, that minds can get sick just like bodies can. She suggests a combination of approaches: physical activity, perhaps having him help with specific tasks that get him outside and moving, dietary changes, more fatty fish, more honey, certain herbs in his ale, and social intervention, making sure he's not left alone too much, that he's included in conversations and activities, even if he doesn't seem interested. She doesn't promise a cure, she can't, but she can offer structure, support, strategies that have worked before. Sometimes that's enough. The family nods, grateful for the guidance, and leaves to implement the suggestions. You wonder how often the healer deals with problems like this. Problems that don't have clear physical symptoms, that can't be treated with honey and herbs alone, that require patience and observation and a willingness to accept that some things take time. More often than you'd expect, probably, because humans are humans, regardless of error. We've always struggled with mental health. We've always needed support and understanding and strategies for coping with the darkness that sometimes descends. The healer returns to her other tasks, and you notice someone else has entered the longhouse. An older woman, walking carefully, holding her stomach. She speaks quietly with the healer, and even from a distance you can tell this is a delicate conversation. Women's health issues probably, the kind that weren't discussed openly, that required privacy and discretion. The healer takes the older woman to a quieter corner of the longhouse, and they speak in voices too low for you to hear. But you can see the healer's expression, concerned but not alarmed, asking questions, listening carefully to the answers, then nodding and beginning to explain something, using her hands to gesture, to illustrate points. Women's medicine was a whole separate category in Viking healing. Pregnancy, childbirth, menstrual problems, menopause, all of these required specific knowledge and specific remedies, and this knowledge was almost exclusively held and passed down by women, because men generally stayed out of these matters entirely. The healer prepares something, a tea probably, based on the herbs she's selecting. Raspberry leaf, maybe. Lady's mantle. Plants known to help with feminine complaints, though the Vikings wouldn't have used that phrase. She adds honey to make it more palatable, and hands it to the older woman with instructions you can't quite hear. The older woman nods, accepts the tea, and drinks it slowly right there. No point taking it home where it might get cold or forgotten. Better to consume it immediately under the healer's watchful eye. They talk for a few more minutes, then the older woman leaves, looking relieved. Not cured, whatever her issue is, probably doesn't have a quick cure, but cared for, acknowledged, given tools to manage her condition. That's often the best medicine can offer. Not cures, but management. Not elimination of suffering, but reduction of it to bearable levels. Not promises, but support. You're still watching the healer work when you notice something else starting to happen. A group is gathering near the fire, several women, ranging in age from young mothers to grandmothers. They're not here for immediate medical attention. This is something else. A teaching session, maybe, or a sharing of knowledge. The younger women have questions, and the older ones have answers, and the healer is facilitating the conversation. One of the younger women is pregnant, visibly so, probably 7 or 8 months along. She's asking about childbirth, what to expect, what to do, how to know when something's wrong versus when things are progressing normally. Her voice is trying to sound casual, unconcerned, but you can hear the fear underneath. Because childbirth was dangerous. Everyone knew someone who died in childbirth or shortly after. The older women respond with a mix of practical advice and reassurance. Yes, it hurts. No, you can't really prepare for how much. But women have been doing this forever, and most survive just fine. Here's what helps, having experienced women with you. Staying upright and moving around for as long as possible, drinking specific teas during labor, knowing how to push effectively, having supplies ready, clean cloth, hot water, honey for energy, herbs to slow bleeding if necessary. The healer adds her own knowledge to the conversation. Signs that labor is starting, how long different stages typically last, what's normal bleeding versus dangerous bleeding, when to worry and when to just endure. She's matter-of-fact about all of it, neither minimizing the risks nor dramatizing them, just presenting information so the young woman can make informed choices. But I haven't told you about the infant mortality yet, and this is the hardest part of Viking medicine to discuss, because it was brutal. Roughly half of children died before reaching adulthood. Half. Disease, injury, malnutrition, accidents, all of these took their toll, and there was only so much the healers could do about it. Babies were vulnerable from the moment they were born. Infections, complications from delivery, inability to nurse properly, any of these could be fatal. And if a baby was born with obvious deformities or seemed unlikely to survive, sometimes the decision was made not to invest resources in trying to save them. It sounds cruel to modern ears, and it was cruel, but it was also practical. In a society where resources were desperately limited, and every mouth to feed mattered. If a baby probably wasn't going to survive anyway, and trying to save them would drain resources that could keep other, healthier children alive, then choices had to be made. The healer never talks about this directly. You've never heard her mention it, but you can see it in her face sometimes when she examines a newborn, that calculation happening. Will this child make it? Is intervention likely to help, or just prolonging inevitable death? Where should the community's limited medical resources be directed? These are impossible questions. Questions no one should have to answer. But someone has to answer them. And in Viking society, that someone is usually the healer. The conversation about childbirth continues, and gradually it shifts to infant care. How to keep babies warm, how to know if they're nursing properly, what to do about colic, about rashes, about all the small problems that seem enormous when you're a new parent. The older women share their experiences, their successes and failures, their accumulated wisdom. One grandmother tells a story about a baby who wouldn't stop crying, who seemed to be in constant discomfort. Nothing worked until someone suggested chamomile tea, just a tiny amount, given carefully. The baby calmed immediately and finally slept. Was it the chamomile, the warmth of the liquid, the simple fact that the parents tried something new and their confidence made the baby feel safer? Impossible to know, but it worked, and that's what mattered. Another woman talks about using lanolin from sheep's wool to treat cracked nipples from nursing. Messy, awkward, but effective. Allowed her to continue breastfeeding when she might otherwise have had to stop, which could have meant the baby's survival or death in a time when alternatives to breast milk were limited and dangerous. The pregnant woman is taking it all in, nodding, occasionally asking follow-up questions. You can see her fear hasn't disappeared. How could it? But it's been supplemented with something else. knowledge, community. The understanding that she won't face this alone, that there are people who will help her, that humans have been doing this forever and she's part of that continuum. The healer watches the conversation with satisfaction. This is preventive medicine too in its way, preparing someone for a major life event, equipping them with knowledge and support, reducing the chances that fear and ignorance will lead to poor decisions during a crisis. Eventually the group breaks up, people returning to their tasks. The pregnant woman lingers for a moment, speaking privately with the healer. They discuss specific concerns, specific plans. The healer reassures her again, promises she'll be there for the birth, reminds her of warning signs that would require immediate help. Then the young woman leaves, and the healer is alone by the fire again. You watch her stare into the flames for a long moment, and you wonder what she's thinking about. Past births she's attended, ones that went well and ones that didn't. Children saved and children lost. The weight of all that experience, all that knowledge, all that responsibility. She takes a deep breath, lets it out slowly, and stands. There's always more work, always someone who needs attention, always remedies to prepare, and knowledge to share, and the endless task of keeping a community healthy enough to survive another season. You realize you've been watching her for what seems like days now, maybe longer. You've seen her treat dozens of conditions, teach multiple students, respond to emergencies, provide routine care, and never, not once, stop working. The work is never done. It just pauses occasionally before resuming. And somehow she keeps doing it, keeps finding the energy and focus and compassion to care for people, even when she must be exhausted, even when she must want to just rest and let someone else handle everything for a while. This is the reality of Viking medicine, not the glamorous parts that make it into stories, not the dramatic cures or heroic interventions, just the daily grinding work of keeping people alive and functional in a world that's constantly trying to kill them. You're sitting by the fire again, and the days are starting to blur together in that way that happens during long winters. The same routines repeat: morning care, midday remedies, evening checks. The sick recover or they don't. The healthy stay healthy or they don't. The wheel keeps turning, relentless and indifferent, and through it all, the healer works. But today something different is happening. You notice it in the way people are moving, the tone of their conversations. There's excitement mixed with anxiety, anticipation mixed with dread. Someone is coming, someone important. The door opens, and a figure enters that you recognize immediately as different. Not because of their clothes, though those are finer than most. Not because of their bearing, though they carry themselves with confidence. But because of the energy in the room. Everyone has shifted their attention to this person, waiting to see what they'll say or do. This is a Jarl, a chieftain, someone with power and influence and the ability to make decisions that affect entire communities. And they're here because their child is sick. The healer rises immediately, not subservient exactly, but respectful. She knows how politics work. She knows that treating a Jarl's child successfully can bring benefits to her entire settlement, protection, resources, trade opportunities. And she knows that failing to treat them successfully can bring the opposite. The Jarl explains the situation. Their youngest son, maybe 6 years old, has been ill for several days. Fever, vomiting, extreme lethargy. They've tried various remedies, consulted other healers, but nothing has worked. The child is getting worse, and they're desperate. Will she come? Will she try to help? The healer doesn't hesitate. She gathers her supplies, wraps herself in furs, and follows the Jarl out into the cold. You follow too, because this feels significant. This feels like something you need to witness. The Jarl's longhouse is larger than the one you've been staying in, better constructed, warmer, better supplied. Wealth doesn't protect against illness, but it certainly makes dealing with it more comfortable. The sick child is in a corner that's clearly been set up specifically for his care. Multiple fur blankets, a small fire nearby for warmth, carved toys scattered around that he's too sick to play with. The healer approaches carefully and begins her examination. She checks his skin temperature with her hand, looks at his eyes, his tongue, his fingernails, asks questions about what he's eaten, what he's vomited, how long since he last urinated. She's methodical, thorough,
gathering information before making any decisions. And then she does something unexpected. She smells him. Not obviously, not dramatically, but you see her lean in close and breathe in, assessing. You realize she's checking for specific scents that might indicate specific conditions. Sweet breath might mean one thing, foul breath something else. The smell of the skin, the smell of the vomit, all of it provides information. She sits back on her heels, thinking. Then she speaks to the Jarl, explaining what she believes is happening. The child has eaten something bad, or drunk contaminated water, and his body is trying to expel it. The fever is his body fighting. The vomiting is protective, even though it feels terrible. What he needs most is fluids, small amounts, given frequently, to prevent him from becoming too dehydrated. And time. His body needs to work through this. But I haven't told you about the politics of healing yet, and this is where it gets complicated. Because the Jarl has already consulted other healers. Those healers have prescribed various treatments, complex herbal mixtures, ritual cleansings, special amulets. If this healer contradicts those treatments, she's essentially saying the other healers are wrong, which could create enemies, could damage relationships, could cause political problems. But if she doesn't contradict them, if she just goes along with treatments she believes are ineffective or even harmful, then the child might die, and a dead child means she's failed, regardless of whether it was her fault. She chooses honesty. She explains that while the other treatments won't necessarily hurt, they probably won't help either. What the child needs is simple: fluids, rest, monitoring. No complex interventions. Just basic supportive care and time. The Jarl listens, expressionless. You can't tell what they're thinking. Are they angry that this healer is dismissing the other's work? Are they relieved to hear a simpler explanation? Are they skeptical that something so serious could have such a simple treatment? Finally, the Jarl nods. They'll try it her way, but she needs to stay here, to monitor the child, to be present if things get worse. She agrees immediately. This is what she does. She stays, she watches, she waits. You watch the healer settle in for what will clearly be a long vigil. She prepares a weak ale mixed with honey and a pinch of salt. Not much, just enough to restore some of what the child has lost through vomiting. She wakes him gently and coaxes him to take a few sips. He resists at first, clearly feeling too miserable to want anything in his stomach, but she's patient. A sip, wait. Another sip, wait. Slow and careful. The child keeps it down, that's a good sign. She waits longer, then offers more. Again he manages to drink it without immediately vomiting. Progress. She repeats this process every hour or so, through the day and into the night. Small amounts of fluid, monitoring constantly, checking his skin for signs of dehydration. Does it bounce back quickly when pinched? Checking his eyes, are they sunken? His lips, are they cracked and dry? You realize this is the unglamorous reality of medicine. Not dramatic interventions or miraculous cures, just patient, careful, consistent attention over time, doing the boring things correctly, repeatedly, until the body has a chance to heal itself. The Jarl watches for a while, then eventually leaves to attend to other matters. But other family members drift in and out, checking on the child, on the healer, making sure everything is being done properly. There's an undercurrent of evaluation happening. They're judging her, assessing whether she knows what she's doing, whether their trust is warranted. The healer ignores this pressure, or at least appears to. She stays focused on the child, on the immediate tasks of keeping him hydrated and comfortable. Nothing else matters. Not politics, not reputation, not the potential consequences of failure. Just this child, right now, needing care. As night deepens, the child's condition begins to shift. The fever starts to break. He's sweating more, which is actually good. It means his body is cooling down, fighting off whatever infection or toxin has been troubling him. The healer changes his damp clothing, wraps him in fresh furs, continues the fluid regimen. By morning he's noticeably better. Still weak, still tired, but the crisis has passed. He's asking for food, which is an excellent sign. The healer allows him a tiny amount, just broth at first. Nothing solid, nothing that will challenge his recovering digestive system too much. The Jarl returns and sees the improvement immediately. Relief washes over their face, followed quickly by gratitude. They offer payment, silver, trade goods, whatever the healer wants. She accepts modestly, not too much, not too little, enough to acknowledge the value of her work without seeming greedy. But more importantly, she's made an ally, a powerful ally. The Jarl will remember this, will speak favorably of her, will ensure her settlement receives benefits. This is how healers acquired status and security in Viking society, not through formal credentials or institutional backing, but through successful treatments and grateful patients and word-of-mouth reputation. She gathers her things, offers final instructions for the child's continued recovery, and prepares to leave. The Jarl walks her to the door personally, a gesture of respect and thanks. They speak quietly for a moment. You can't hear the words, but the tone is warm, appreciative. Then she's back outside in the cold, walking home through snow that started falling again. She looks exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes from extended vigilance, from knowing that any mistake could have meant a child's death, from carrying that weight for hours and hours. But she also looks satisfied. The child will live. The family is grateful. The work was successful. And somewhere in the healer's internal ledger, this gets recorded as another small victory against the constant threat of death and disease. You walk beside her in silence, watching the settlement come into view. Smoke rising from longhouses, the familiar landscape, home. Inside her longhouse, life has continued without her. The younger woman she's training handled the routine care adequately. No emergencies, no crises, everything maintained until the healer's return. She's greeted with questions about the Jarl's child, and she gives a brief account. Then she finally allows herself to rest. Really rest. Sitting by the fire, eating real food, letting someone else handle things for a few hours while she recovers. You realize you're tired too. Not physically, you don't think you have a physical body in this place, but mentally, emotionally tired, from witnessing so much suffering and struggle, and the constant battle to keep people alive in conditions that seem designed to kill them. The healer closes her eyes for a moment, just resting, and you find yourself doing the same. The fire crackles. People move around, their footsteps soft on the packed earth floor. The smell of smoke and fish and humanity fills the air. The sounds of breathing, of life continuing. And in this moment everything feels almost peaceful, almost safe, almost like survival is possible, even inevitable. Of course you know it's not that simple. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new illnesses, new injuries, new crises. The work never ends, the struggle continues. But for now, just for this moment, there's rest, there's warmth, there's the satisfaction of work done well, and lives saved, and communities maintained. And that, you're beginning to understand, is all anyone can really ask for. Not perfect health, or absolute safety, or guaranteed survival. Just moments like this, brief respites in the ongoing battle against entropy and death, and the general tendency of the universe toward chaos. The Vikings understood this implicitly. They didn't expect life to be easy, or fair, or comfortable. They just expected to keep fighting, keep trying, keep caring for each other until they couldn't anymore. And somehow, improbably, that was enough. You're watching the healer sleep, and you realize this is the first time you've seen her truly still. Even in rest, there's a certain tension to her body, as if she's always partly listening, always ready to wake if someone needs her. But right now, in this moment, she's deeply asleep, exhausted, the kind of sleep that comes after pushing yourself past every reasonable limit, and finally being allowed to stop. Around her, the longhouse continues its life. Children playing quietly, adults working on various tasks, the fire being tended, food being prepared. Everyone is being careful to keep the noise down, to let the healer rest. It's a collective act of care, recognition that she gives so much and deserves this time to recover. You drift away from her sleeping form and find yourself drawn to the storage area where all the remedies are kept. In the dim light, you can see jars and pouches and bundles, each one representing knowledge accumulated over generations. This one for fevers, this one for wounds, this one for digestive problems, this one for pain. Some are labeled with simple marks carved into the containers, symbols that mean something to those who know the system. Some aren't labeled at all, identified only by location and appearance, knowledge held in memory rather than writing. This is an archive, in its way, a library of practical knowledge about how to keep humans alive. You reach out, or try to toward one of the jars, and of course your hand passes through it. You're not really here. You're observing something that happened long ago, watching shadows of lives that ended centuries before you were born. But it feels real. The knowledge feels real. The struggles feel real. Because they were real. These people existed. They got sick and injured and scared. They needed help. And other people like the healer sleeping by the fire, helped them. Did their best with limited resources and incomplete understanding. Sometimes succeeded, sometimes failed, but always tried. The younger woman who's been training enters the storage area, and she moves with more confidence now than she did days ago. She selects items without hesitation, mixes them with practiced movements. She's learning, becoming competent. Eventually she'll be the one everyone depends on, and she'll train someone else, and the cycle will continue. This is how knowledge survives in oral cultures, through teaching, through apprenticeship, through watching and doing and eventually mastering. It's inefficient compared to written texts, but it's also intimate, personal. The knowledge comes with context, with stories, with the accumulated wisdom of experience that doesn't always translate to words on a page. But I haven't told you about the failures yet, and there were failures. Not every patient recovered. Not every remedy worked. Not every child survived. The healer has seen plenty of both triumphs and tragedies. And the tragedies stay with you, probably more than the triumphs. The people you couldn't save. The treatments that didn't work. The moments when you realized there was nothing more you could do. You drift back toward the fire and notice someone crying quietly in a corner. An older man, shoulders shaking, trying to muffle the sound. No one approaches him directly, but people are aware, glancing over, making sure he's okay, in the sense of not being in physical danger, even if he's clearly not okay emotionally. Eventually someone does approach. Not the healer, she's still sleeping, but another older man, someone who seems to know the crying man well. They sit together in silence for a while, then begin talking in voices too low to hear. You get the sense that the crying man has lost someone recently, maybe in that ice accident, maybe some other tragedy, and he's processing that loss in the only way he can. This is grief support, Viking style, not therapy or counseling in any modern sense, just presence, community, the acknowledgement that loss is part of life, and you're allowed to feel it, and people will sit with you while you do. The healer wakes eventually, as you knew she would. She sits up, orients herself, and immediately her attention goes to the longhouse, scanning for problems that might have arisen while she slept. She spots the grieving man and watches him for a moment, then nods to herself. He's being cared for. Nothing requires her immediate intervention. She stands, stretches, works out the stiffness from sleeping in an awkward position, then she returns to her tasks. Always more tasks, always more work. Today it's restocking her supplies. Some of what she used for the Giles child needs to be replaced. She goes through her stores systematically, noting what's running low, what needs gathering or trading for, what can wait, and what's urgent. This is the logistics of medicine, the behind-the-scenes work that nobody thinks about but that's absolutely essential. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't have the actual materials to treat people, that knowledge is useless. She makes a list, mental, since she doesn't write things down, of what she needs and where she might get it. Some items she can gather herself when weather permits. Some she'll need to trade for. Some she'll have to wait for traveling merchants to bring. It's a constant puzzle, matching needs with availability with resources. You follow the healer outside, where she's heading toward a small outbuilding you haven't paid much attention to before. Inside it's colder than the main longhouse, but that's intentional. This is where certain remedies are stored that need to be kept cool. Salves and ointments that would melt or spoil in the warmth. Certain herbs that last longer in cold conditions. Even some of the bog butter, packed in clay pots and sealed with wax. She's checking everything, making sure nothing has frozen solid or developed mold or been contaminated by pests. It's tedious work, but necessary. Medicine that's gone bad is worse than no medicine at all. It can actively harm people. As she works, she's teaching again. The younger woman has followed her, and the healer is explaining why each item is stored the way it is, how to tell if something has spoiled, what to do if supplies run low. The younger woman asks questions, makes observations, demonstrates her growing understanding. This is the most important work the healer does, maybe. Not treating individual patients, but ensuring that this knowledge continues. That when she's too old, or sick, or dead to do this work herself, someone else will know how. The knowledge will survive even if she doesn't. You watch them work together, and you're struck by the patience involved. The healer could do this faster alone, but she slows down, explains, lets the younger woman handle things even when her technique isn't quite perfect yet. Because speed doesn't matter as much as teaching does. Efficiency matters less than continuity. They finish checking the cold storage and return to the main longhouse, where the daily routine is in full swing. Someone has brought in fresh fish from ice fishing. Someone else is working on repairing tools. Children are being taught various skills, weaving, carving, the basics of their culture's practical knowledge. And in the middle of it all, someone is sick again. Of course someone is sick. There's always someone sick. This time it's a teenage boy, with what looks like an infected tooth. His face is swollen, and he's clearly in significant pain. Tooth problems were particularly dangerous in Viking times. Infections could spread to the jaw, to the blood, to the brain. People died from bad teeth regularly. The healer examines him carefully, and her expression is serious. The tooth needs to come out. There's no saving it, and the longer it stays in, the worse the infection will get. But removing a tooth is not simple. It's painful, dangerous, and requires a steady hand and strong grip. The healer has done it before, you can tell from her confidence, but it's never pleasant for anyone involved. She explains what needs to happen, and the boy looks terrified. She doesn't sugarcoat it. Yes, it will hurt. A lot. But the alternative is worse. Much worse. Infection spreading. Fever. Possible death. So the tooth comes out. She prepares her tools, a special implement, designed for gripping and pulling teeth, made from bone and iron, clean cloth for bleeding, something to bite down on, and a strong herbal mixture that won't eliminate the pain but might dull it slightly. The boy drinks the herbal mixture, willow bark, and other things you recognize as mild painkillers. Then she has him lie back with his head supported. Several strong people position themselves to hold him still, because he will fight instinctively when the pain hits, even if intellectually he knows this is necessary. She works quickly. Grip. Position. Pull. The tooth comes out with a nauseating cracking sound, and the boy screams, muffled by the cloth in his mouth. Blood flows heavily, and she immediately packs the socket with cloth soaked in something astringent. It's brutal, medieval dentistry in all its horror, but it's also necessary. The infected tooth is out. The source of the infection is removed. Now the boy's body can actually heal instead of fighting a losing battle. She keeps pressure on the wound until the bleeding slows, then instructs the boy and his family on aftercare. Gentle saltwater rinses. Soft foods only. Watch for signs of continued infection. Come back immediately if the pain gets worse instead of better. The boy leaves, still in pain but no longer in danger. Another crisis managed. Another small victory against the constant threat of death. You realize you've been watching this work for days now, or what feels like days, and you still haven't seen everything. There are layers upon layers to Viking medicine. Techniques you haven't witnessed. Conditions you haven't seen treated. Knowledge that exists, but hasn't come up yet. The healer washes her hands thoroughly. She's particular about cleanliness, more so than many people in this era. She doesn't know about germ theory, but she knows that clean hands mean fewer infections. That's enough. Then she returns to her spot by the fire, and the routine continues. Someone asks about a skin rash. Someone else needs a cough remedy. A child has an earache. The day progresses in an endless series of small medical consultations, minor treatments, routine care. This is the reality. Not dramatic life-saving moments, though those happen too, but this steady stream of minor problems that need attention. The constant work of maintaining a baseline of health for everyone in the community. And through it all, the healer remains present, focused, caring, even when she must be exhausted, even when she must want a break, even when the demands must feel overwhelming. She keeps working. Because this is what she does. This is who she is. This is the role she's taken on, and she'll fulfill it until she physically can't anymore. And then someone else will take over, and the work will continue. The fire crackles, the smoke rises, the longhouse stays warm, people stay alive mostly. That's all anyone can ask for, really. In a world this harsh, in conditions this difficult, just staying alive is victory enough. You're still by the fire, and time keeps moving in that strange, fluid way it has in this place. Days blur together. You watch the healer work through what might be a week, or 2 weeks, or longer. The specific passage of time doesn't seem to matter as much as the patterns, the rhythms, the way certain tasks repeat on certain schedules, the way the community organizes itself around seasonal needs and daily survival. Winter is deepening. You can tell by the quality of light, what little there is, and by the way people move, slower, more carefully, conserving energy because food is scarcer now, because bodies need more calories just to stay warm, because every expenditure of effort matters. The healer is preparing for something. You can see it in how she's organizing her supplies, in the conversation she's having with other women, in the specific remedies she's making in larger quantities than usual. Something is coming, something that happens every year around this time. Then you understand. Childbirth. The pregnant woman you saw earlier is getting close to her time, and the healer is preparing to attend the birth. Childbirth in Viking society was exclusively a women's domain. Men were not present, not involved, not welcome. This was women's work, women's knowledge, women's power. And it was dangerous work. Maternal mortality was high. Infant mortality was higher. Every birth was a gamble against death. The healer gathers the women who will assist, usually family members, but also experienced mothers who've been through this themselves. They discuss the plan, the preparations, what each person's role will be, who will support the laboring woman physically, who will manage supplies, who will receive the baby, who will handle complications if they arise. And then they wait, because babies come on their own schedule, not anyone else's. The wait isn't long. A few days after these preparations, word comes that the woman has gone into labor. It's the middle of the night, of course, because babies don't care about convenience. The healer rises immediately, gathers her prepared supplies, and heads to where the woman is laboring. You follow, though part of you hesitates. This feels private, sacred, not something an outsider should witness. But you're drawn forward anyway, compelled to see this final piece of Viking medicine. The moment when new life either enters the world successfully or doesn't. The laboring woman is in a separate space within her family's longhouse, partitioned off with hanging furs for privacy. She's upright, supported by 2 other women, moving and swaying through contractions. The healer arrives and immediately assesses the situation. How far along is she? How are the contractions? Is the baby positioned correctly? Everything seems normal so far, which is good. Normal is what you want in childbirth. Complications are common enough without hoping for them. But I haven't told you about the rituals yet. The things done during labor that weren't strictly medical but were considered just as important. Someone has brought special charms, small carved figures, protective amulets. These are placed around the laboring woman, creating a circle of protection. Someone else is burning specific herbs, creating smoke that's supposed to ease the pain and protect against evil spirits that might harm the mother or baby. There are words being spoken, not quite prayers but something similar. Invocations, requests for protection, for an easy birth, for health. The healer allows all of this, participates in some of it even, because this is part of the care, the psychological support, the sense that everything possible is being done, both physical and spiritual. It helps the laboring woman feel safer, more confident, and that matters. Labor progresses. Hours pass. The woman is tiring, which is normal but concerning. Childbirth requires enormous physical effort, and if someone is already weakened by malnutrition or illness, or just the general hardships of Viking life, they might not have the strength to see it through. The healer monitors carefully, offering sips of honey-sweetened ale for energy. encouraging the woman to keep moving, to stay upright as long as possible. Gravity helps, checking periodically for progress, for signs that something might be going wrong. And then finally, the baby is coming. The woman is moved to a birthing position, squatting, supported by 2 women on either side. The healer positions herself to receive the baby, hands ready, attention focused entirely on this moment. You watch the birth happen, and it's messy and primal and nothing like the sanitized versions you might have seen in your own time. There's blood, there's other fluids, there's screaming, the woman pushing with everything she has, making sounds that are barely human, just pure animal effort. The women supporting her are encouraging her, telling her she can do this. She's almost there, just a little more. And then the baby emerges, slippery, covered in vernix and blood, tiny and impossibly fragile. The healer catches the baby, checks immediately that it's breathing. It is, thank everything, and hands it to one of the assistants to clean and wrap while she attends to the mother. Because the birth isn't over yet, the placenta still needs to come out, and this is where things can go very wrong. If the placenta doesn't detach properly, if bleeding becomes too heavy, the mother can die even though the baby is fine. The healer massages the mother's abdomen gently, encouraging the uterus to contract. She's watching for signs of excessive bleeding, ready to intervene if necessary with herbs that help blood clot, with pressure applied to specific points, with whatever techniques she has to prevent the mother from bleeding out. The placenta comes out intact. The bleeding is heavy but not catastrophic. The healer packs cloth against the perineum, where tearing has occurred. This almost always happens, and waits to see if the bleeding slows to manageable levels. It does, gradually, but it does. The crisis is passing. The baby, a girl, is cleaned and wrapped and placed at the mother's breast. The mother is exhausted, pale, shaking with the aftermath of effort and adrenaline. But she's alive. The baby is alive. This is success. The healer stays for hours afterward, monitoring, making sure the bleeding stays controlled, making sure the baby is nursing properly, making sure the mother can rest even though she's too keyed up to really sleep, answering questions, providing reassurance, being present. And finally, when everything is stable and there's nothing more to be done, she gathers her supplies and prepares to leave. The new mother thanks her, tears in her eyes, gratitude overwhelming. The healer accepts this quietly, not making a big deal of it. This is what she does. This is the work. Outside, dawn is breaking. The sky is that pale grey pink that comes before sunrise in winter. The healer walks slowly back to her own longhouse, and you can see the exhaustion in every line of her body. She's been up all night, working, focused, carrying the weight of 2 lives in her hands. But there's also satisfaction, relief, joy even, because both mother and baby survived, because the birth went well, because she did her job and it worked. These are the moments that make everything else worthwhile, the successes that balance out the failures, the lives saved that justify all the effort and knowledge and care. Back in her longhouse, people are waking up, starting their day. Someone asks about the birth, and she gives a brief report. Healthy baby girl, mother doing well. Everyone smiles, pleased with the good news. A new life in the community is always cause for celebration, especially in winter when death is so common. The healer finally allows herself to sit, to eat, to rest, but you can see her mind is still working, already thinking about the follow-up care the mother will need, the monitoring to make sure no infection develops, the support to help the mother establish breastfeeding successfully, the vigilance to ensure the baby thrives during those critical first weeks. The work never stops, it just shifts focus. You realize you've witnessed something profound, not just a birth, but the entire system of care that surrounds it. The preparation, the knowledge, the community support, the ritual elements, the practical interventions, all of it working together to give a mother and baby the best possible chance of survival. And this happens throughout the Viking world, in hundreds of longhouses, in countless communities, women helping women through this most dangerous and most essential of human experiences. The knowledge being passed down, refined, adapted, kept alive through practice and teaching, and the fundamental necessity of bringing the next generation into the world. This is Viking medicine at its most essential. Not treating disease or injury, but facilitating life itself, making it possible for humans to reproduce successfully, even in harsh conditions, keeping both mothers and babies alive at rates high enough that communities could sustain themselves, could grow, could continue. Without this work, without women like the healer, with their knowledge and skill and dedication, Viking society couldn't have existed. The settlements would have died out. The culture would have disappeared. But because of this work, life continued. Children were born, families grew, communities survived. The healer closes her eyes, just for a moment, and you see something like peace on her face, contentment, the knowledge that she's done something meaningful, something essential. And then she opens her eyes and returns to her work, because there's always more work, always someone who needs care, always the ongoing battle against death and disease, and the general difficulty of keeping humans alive. But in this moment at least, there's victory, a new life in the world, a mother who survived, a family made whole. That's enough. For now, that's enough. You're still in the longhouse, and spring is finally tentatively arriving. You can feel it in the air, something subtle shifting, the quality of cold becoming less aggressive, less determined to kill everything it touches. The light is different too, lasting a bit longer each day, offering the promise that winter will eventually end, even if it doesn't quite believe its own promise yet. The healer is preparing for the seasonal transition, and this preparation is as medical as it is practical, because spring, paradoxically, could be as dangerous as winter in its own way. People were weakest at the end of winter, depleted, vitamin deficient, their immune systems compromised by months of limited food and close quarters and constant illness. Spring brought new opportunities but also new challenges. The first task is the great cleaning. Everything that can be moved outside will be. Every surface that can be scrubbed will be. The accumulated filth of winter, and there's a lot of it, needs to be removed before it breeds disease as the weather warms. You watch as the longhouse is systematically emptied. Furs and blankets are carried outside to be beaten and aired. Sleeping platforms are scraped clean. The floor is swept thoroughly, then scrubbed with sand and water. Even the walls get attention, scraped free of the worst accumulations of soot and grease. It's exhausting work, and everyone participates. Children, adults, elders, everyone who's physically capable contributes something. Because this isn't just about cleanliness for its own sake. This is preventive medicine. This is reducing the risk of infection, of parasites, of all the illnesses that thrive in dirt and darkness. The healer supervises some of this, offering guidance on which cleaning methods work best, which areas need the most attention. But she's also doing something else, evaluating everyone's health as they work. Who's moving well and who's struggling? Who has energy and who's depleted? Who made it through winter in good shape and who barely made it at all? Because spring was when you could finally start addressing the accumulated health deficits of winter, when fresh foods became available again, when vitamin deficiencies could be corrected, when bodies could begin to heal from months of just barely surviving. But I haven't told you about the spring tonics yet, and these were crucial to Viking health. The healer has been watching for them, the first green shoots emerging as the snow melts, specific plants that appear early, before much else is growing. These plants are precious, packed with nutrients that bodies desperately need after winter's deprivations. She takes a small group out to gather them, teaching as she goes. This plant for vitamin C, its leaves can be eaten raw or made into tea. This one for minerals, cook it briefly, just enough to soften. This one for digestive health, it helps the gut recover from winter's poor diet. They gather carefully, not taking too much from any one area, ensuring the plants can continue growing. Sustainability wasn't a term they used, but the concept was embedded in practice. You don't destroy your medicine sources. Back at the longhouse, these first greens are prepared and distributed. Everyone gets some, but the healer pays special attention to those who seem most depleted. The elderly, the children, anyone who was sick during winter, anyone whose teeth are loose or gums are bleeding. Signs of scurvy that these plants can help reverse. You watch people eating these bitter greens, and you can almost see their bodies responding. Not immediately, obviously, but over days and weeks. Color returning to faces, energy increasing. the visible signs of malnutrition gradually fading. This is public health in action, community-wide intervention to address seasonal health challenges, not treating individuals in isolation, but recognizing that everyone's health is connected, that raising the baseline health of the entire community benefits everyone. The healer also reopened her cold storage, checking what survived winter and what didn't. Some remedies need to be discarded. They've spoiled or lost potency. Others are still good and get moved back into the main storage area. She's taking inventory, making lists of what needs to be gathered or made before next winter arrives. Because that's the thing about Viking medicine. You're always preparing for the next crisis, the next winter, the next outbreak, the next emergency. You can't afford to be complacent, can't afford to assume things will be fine. You prepare constantly, maintaining readiness, because survival depends on it. Around her, the community is coming back to life in other ways. People are planning planting, repairing buildings and tools, preparing ships for trading or raiding or fishing expeditions. The rhythm of life is shifting from winter's inward focus to spring and summer's outward energy. But the healer's work remains constant. Someone sprains an ankle helping with the cleaning. Someone else develops a spring cold, still dangerous even as the weather improves. A child falls and cuts their head, requiring stitches. The work never stops, just changes its seasonal flavor. You're watching the healer teach again, and this time it feels different, more formal, more intentional. She's gathered several younger women, not just her primary apprentice, but others who've shown interest or aptitude for healing work. This is a teaching circle, a deliberate transfer of knowledge to the next generation. Because the healer is getting older. You can see it in the way she moves, the grey in her hair, the lines in her face. She won't be able to do this work forever. She's teaching them about spring remedies specifically, which plants to gather when, how to prepare them, what conditions they treat. But she's also teaching something deeper, the philosophy behind the practice, the observation skills, the way of thinking that allows you to diagnose problems and devise solutions with limited resources. She tells stories as she teaches, not just about remedies, but about patience, about successes and failures, about times when she made mistakes and what she learned from them, about times when everything went right and why. These stories are as important as the technical knowledge. They're the context, the wisdom, the accumulated experience that can't be reduced to simple recipes or procedures. One of the younger women asks about the hardest part of being a healer. The healer pauses, considering the question carefully. The hardest part, she finally says, isn't the long hours, or the difficult treatments, or even the failures. The hardest part is carrying the weight of knowledge, knowing what's likely to happen, knowing when someone probably won't survive, knowing when you're fighting a losing battle, but having to fight anyway, because that's what people need from you. It's knowing too much, she says, and not being able to unknow it. The younger women are quiet, absorbing this. This is the reality they're signing up for, not the glory, or the status, or even the satisfaction of helping people, though those exist too. But primarily, this is a burden, a responsibility, a weight you carry for the rest of your life. Do they still want it? Are they willing? Most of them nod. Yes, they understand. They still want to learn, want to help, want to take on this role. The healer seems satisfied with this, and the teaching continues. She's showing them something now, a technique for setting broken fingers. It requires precision and confidence, and the willingness to cause pain in the short term to prevent worse problems long term. She demonstrates on a carved wooden model first, then has each woman practice until their movements are confident and correct. This is skills training, hands-on practice, the only way to really learn medical procedures, by doing them, repeatedly, until they become second nature. You realize this teaching has been happening throughout all your time here, woven into every interaction. Every treatment the healer performed was also a demonstration for those watching. Every explanation she gave was teaching. Every decision she made was modeling how to think about medical problems. This is how knowledge survives in oral cultures, not through books or formal schools, but through constant, embedded teaching, through making the learning inseparable from the doing, through ensuring that every generation has access to the accumulated wisdom of previous generations. And it works. Despite having no written medical texts, Despite having no formal training institutions, Viking healers maintained and developed sophisticated medical knowledge over centuries. They learned what worked. They remembered it. They taught it. They refined it. And the knowledge survived. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. It also required dedication. The willingness to do this hard work, year after year, despite the difficulties and dangers and emotional toll. The healer looks at her students, and you can see her evaluating them. Which ones have the skills? Which ones have the dedication? Which ones will actually continue this work long term? And which ones will give up when it gets too hard? She can't know for certain, but she can make educated guesses based on how they approach the learning, how they handle difficult information, how they respond to the weight of responsibility she's placing on their shoulders. Some will make it, some won't. That's just reality. The work is too hard for everyone. But the ones who do make it, they'll carry this knowledge forward. They'll become the healers their communities depend on. They'll teach the next generation after them. And the cycle will continue. The knowledge will survive. The work will go on. The teaching session ends as the light begins to fade. The women disperse, returning to their other tasks, carrying with them the information and skills they've learned today. The healer watches them go, and you can see something like satisfaction on her face. Not complete satisfaction. There's always more to teach. Always more they need to learn. But the knowledge that she's done what she can, that she's passing it on,